Well, thank
Okay.
you all very much for being here. This is to the eighth in the series of webinars. And as the Jamaica Developers Association tries to keep our membership up to date, new regulations, new advances, so that we can take proper advantage of the opportunities that open up for us. And as also to keep the members of the public aware of what we are doing and what they should be expecting from their uh, homes and any new investments they make in real estate. To, to start us off and to get us going on the right foot, I'm going to call on Deacon Reynolds Scott, our longest serving chairman of the Developers Association, to put on his clerical hat and lead us in prayer this morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Well, good morning again, everyone. And well, I suppose we have been invoking God's blessings and on all the previous webinars, and they have been informative and productive. So we continue to ask for his guidance today as well. Let us pray. Lord and Father, thank you for allowing us all, everyone on this platform, everyone on this webinar, Lord, to live another day in your awesome, awesome creation. We thank you for that. Lord, as we come to you today, to the eighth webinar in the series by the association, Lord, we thank you for your involvement. Thank you for your direction. And we now ask that as members of the association, stakeholders in the association, advertisers, the association, and prospective developers who are online. We ask that the information that is shared today will fulfill the purposes of not only benefiting us here today, Lord, but will create benefits and extend those benefits to communities all across this nation. So, Father, give us a clear vision in the way we should go today. And Lord, give us the wisdom not to miss the mark. We thank you always that you are with us. We ask these things now in your name. Amen, amen, and amen.
Amen. Okay. You certainly have found another profession and calling. What a profession, a calling. We thank you for that, Deacon Scott. And
God is good. God is good.
amen. And we also have to give thanks today for the acknowledgement, national acknowledgement that one of our directors has received. Our long-serving director, Donald Moore, Order of Distinction. And we congratulate him, and as we know, when you are rewarded for good work, it means that there is more work coming your way. So thank you, and thank you for your efforts and all the work that you have done on behalf of our country. And we look forward to your continuing participation with the affairs of the Developers Association. And to moderate our program today, we have none other than His Excellency Afif Lazarus, known to many of us as the guru of real estate conveyancing, a man of many parts, a singer of some renown, an attorney, of course, and a philanthropist, and just an all-around good man. Somebody that I'm blessed to have known and be having a privilege to work with. And so, without any further ado, On his second bite of as being our moderator, we thank him for taking the time, and I hand over to him as he takes us through our paces today. Welcome and thanks, Afif.
Thank you, Dayton. It was quite an introduction. Thank you very much indeed. Well, we have a wonderful webinar to look forward to today. When it's the eighth, as we have heard, eighth webinar of the Real Estate Developers Association, and the final one, I think, for 2024. We have three very relevant areas in which we are delving into today. First of all, the impact of low-income housing on national development. And secondly, the area of navigating covenant modification, legal guidelines, and neighbor relations. Very important, and a lot of people overlook it. For some reason, I think it is way down the totem pole. And thirdly and finally, integrating water harvesting in new and old developments. And we have an array of presenters who are well versed in these various aspects of real estate development. But before we break into the meat of the matter, I would invite Dr. Wayne Henry to deliver the opening address for this webinar. And by way of introduction, he is the Chairman and Director General of the Planning Institute of Jamaica, and he has been so since 2016. Prior to joining the PIOJ, he spent 5 years as Vice President, Government Affairs of the Scotia Group, served as Chief Technical Advisor to the Minister of Finance, as well as Special Advisor to the Minister of Agriculture. Previously worked as the World Bank's representative in Jamaica and spent several years as a lecturer in economics at the University of the West Indies on the Mona campus. He's currently the Chairman of the Jamaica Social Investment Fund, Chairman of the National Social Protection Committee, a member of the National Disaster Risk Management Council and the National Foreign Trade Council. He's a Justice of the Peace and a lay pastor, a number of those today, in the Methodist Church in Jamaica. And in 2021, he was recognized by the government of Jamaica, conferred with the Order of Distinction, the rank of Commander, for outstanding public service in the development of Jamaica's sustainable policies. I think you would all agree with me that he's someone who knows a lot about the subject that we're dealing with today, wealth of experience. And now it gives me a great deal of pleasure to invite Dr. Henry to address it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, Mr. Afif Lazarus. Are you hearing me well?
Yes, yes, sir, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Dayton Wood, Chairman of the Jamaica Developers Association, membership of the JDA. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a tremendous pleasure to be invited just to share in the JDA webinar today. And three young boys were walking home from school, and the first one says, I'm not doing well in mathematics. And the second one said, me either. And the third one said, boy, that make four of us. But anyway, let me turn to the subject matter. I want to speak on the topic of resilient housing strategies. And this is so vital to our nation's future. Housing is more than just shelter. Like food and clothing, shelter is considered among man's basic needs. As climate change impacts intensify, safe, strong, or resilient housing is essential, not only to protect individual households, but also to contribute to the broader socio-economic stability of our nation. Housing resilience is known in the urban development field as the measurable ability of homes to withstand and recover from shocks and stresses, natural disasters, economic challenges, and other adversities. As Jamaicans, we know all too well the unpredictable power of nature, Our primary risks are linked to natural hazards, including hurricanes, flooding, drought, landslides, and storm surges. Jamaica is the third most exposed country in the world to multiple natural hazards, with over 96% of the country's GDP and population at risk from 2 or more hazards. Furthermore, it is estimated that 60% of our population lives within the coastal zone, or 5 kilometers from the coastline. This exacerbates the high exposure to storm surge and coastal erosion, among other factors. With the rise in frequency and intensity of climate-related hazards, we therefore face an urgent need to bolster our housing infrastructure to withstand more intense storms, extremes of rainfall, heat waves, and so on. The Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions, the JSLC, assesses the national housing stock via the Housing Quality Index, what we call the HQI, which is based on 6 key indicators of housing conditions. These include, but are not limited to, material of outer walls, that we call durability, access to electricity, main source of drinking water, and number of persons per habitable room. The Housing Quality Index currently stands at 78%, which is relatively good, 78%. It, however, belies the fact that there are pockets of substandard housing due to aged units and infrastructure, limited or poor maintenance, poor construction, including non-adherence to building codes, makeshift units, and siting in vulnerable locations. We also have a large number of unplanned communities, some of which are known to be affected by low housing quality. Many of these are among the over 700 communities classified as vulnerable by the ODPEP. In addition, the housing policy identifies the existence of a severe housing shortage, indicating the need for replacement of obsolete stock and a demand-supply gap that requires the production of at least 15,000 units annually. Recent projections from the State of the Jamaican Climate Report in 2022 underscore the severity of our climate risks. The climate models predict that Jamaica could be impacted by up to an 80% increase in Category 4 and 5 hurricanes, a staggering statistic that brings urgency to our discussion. The models predict that the country will experience hotter days with an average increase in temperatures between 0.65 and 0.85 degrees Celsius, rising sea levels with an increase of between 0.43 and 0.67 meters, intense rainfall and storms with an increase of 2 to 11% with higher wind speeds, and drier days with a projection of up to 4% drier island-wide. These climate impacts are likely to have far-reaching implications for the various sectors. For housing, it means a greater need to respond to flooding, to mitigate urban heat, increased energy demands, and impacted water quality and quantity, and disrupted water supplies. The country is also prone to seismic hazards being crossed by 5 major fault lines, including the Planting Garden Fault Zone, which triggered the 2010 Haitian earthquake. In fact, over 400 earthquakes are detected annually. This naturally increases hazard risk for the housing sector, especially risks to those who have not built to code or which are located in environmentally sensitive or vulnerable areas. In this regard, the enforcement of the building code and other environmental regulations and standards is paramount to ensuring improved resilience of our housing infrastructure. The recent extreme weather event, Hurricane Beryl, demonstrated the high hazard risk of the housing stock. Although the direct impact from the storm was localized, the southern parishes of St. Elizabeth and Clarendon were the hardest hit. Hurricane Beryl caused significant damage to the housing sector, destroying nearly 800 houses, severely damaging over 4,000 others, with more than 8,000 homes recording minor damage. The sector sustained an estimated $1.4 billion in damage, and up to last week, there were still a number of families in the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management shelters. This fact demonstrates a level of disruption and dislocation to families occasioned by the realization of hazard risk, where housing was not resilient. Note that the impact to the sector was not only borne by those directly affected, but by all of us. And the government of Jamaica paid out over $1 billion to assist families with housing repairs. Fortuitously, Jamaica has mainstreamed climate resilience in our National Development Plan, Vision 2030 Jamaica. Through this strategy, we are strengthening our ability to cope with natural and man-made hazards and building our capacity to respond effectively. Accordingly, the country has developed a multi-layered disaster risk financing strategy, inclusive of the National Disaster Fund, catastrophe insurance, contingent credit facilities, and a catastrophe bond. We know adequate housing considers location, availability, security of tenure, and affordability. However, adequacy is only one part of the equation. Resilience must be the next focus. Here, there are three approaches to suggest on how we can move forward. And I dare say that you in this sector have a large role to play. One, climate and seismic resilient design. Resilience must go beyond storm survival to ensure energy efficiency and environmental sustainability. By incorporating green building practices, we reduce reliance on external resources during emergencies and lower energy costs. Imagine a future where solar-powered homes, natural ventilation, and rainwater harvesting are the standard for all Jamaican households. Green buildings conserve energy, manage waste, and optimize water usage, all critical for an island nation vulnerable to extreme weather. The GSLC 2021 reports that 73% of our housing is built with concrete blocks and steel, and that's a positive indicator of durability and structural soundness. But we can add to durability by scaling up green building practices. We need accessible green certifications and incentives. Envision developments with permeable surfaces to reduce flooding, and green roofs or walls that naturally cool homes, reducing reliance on air conditioning. These eco-smart designs create self-sufficiency and enhance comfort. Building seismic resilient housing must take consideration of the use of appropriate construction materials, technology, techniques, and standards. This will have to be supported by rigorous monitoring of the development process and enforcement of standards and regulations. 2, urban planning and zoning. Land use planning, risk mapping, and no-build zones are essential for safety. Unfortunately, some of Jamaica's most vulnerable citizens live in informal settlements along gully banks, hillsides, and flood-prone areas. In these high-risk areas, disaster risk is amplified by poor construction quality and a lack of access to formal services. This is a prime opportunity to champion the call for the need to finally define specially vulnerable areas, as mentioned in the Disaster Risk Management Act of 2015. Additionally, the use of hotspot analysis tools, such as the Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment Tool, the JSRAT, is an important data-driven addition to the government's assessment of climate risk, particularly with respect to critical infrastructure such as water, transport, and energy. These tools can be used by housing developers to improve the resilience in the developments in which you invest. Thirdly, economic and social safety nets. Resilient housing is not only about building strong buildings, but also about supporting families financially. In this regard, we could explore programs to widen access to subsidies, grants, and low-interest loans for the purchase of resilient housing and or to effect upgrades to existing units to improve resilience. Access to home insurance is another critical part of resilience, as this enables faster recovery and reduces the financial burden after emergencies. The Survey of Living Conditions 2021 reports that only 6.3% of Jamaicans have home insurance. leaving the majority financially vulnerable after disasters. By supporting programs that make insurance more affordable and accessible, we can shield more households from economic devastation. Widespread insurance coverage not only protects individuals, but also strengthens national resilience by reducing the strain on public funds post-disaster. And so in conclusion, achieving resilient housing in Jamaica requires a holistic approach. By embracing green buildings, we create homes that are sustainable and resource efficient. By incorporating seismic and climate responsive designs, we ensure that homes harmonize with our environment, reducing strain during extreme events. Strengthening our urban zoning policies and enforcing building codes and standards enable us to build communities that are secure and adaptable in the face of future challenges. Resilient housing is not just about construction. It is about empowerment, community strength, and economic stability. The private sector has a significant role to play in this by, among other things, providing resilient homes on the market at affordable prices. Together, we can build Jamaica, and a Jamaica that is not only withstands the forces and vagaries of nature, but thrives in the face of them. A Jamaica that is a place to live, work, raise families, and do business. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Henry. That forms a solid foundation for the matters to be discussed here today. Thank you very much for that stirring opening address. And we look forward to seeing how the Jamaica Developers Association is going to address those issues that you have identified. We go now to the first commercial break, and afterwards we come back with the first of the papers, The Impact of Low-Income Housing and on National Development.
For over 40 years, the Gian Group of companies have been developing plans, laying foundations, building hundreds of homes of distinction, creating exclusive and secure communities in which we live, play, and raise families. The Gian Group of companies, creating homes that people enjoy.
Solutions, support, service, smart AI features, DigiView Security Limited, human detection, line crossing, license plate recognition, 180-degree camera view, 360-degree camera view, multiple angle view, face recognition,
Embrace the future. Build cleaner. Build greener. Build with Carib Cement.
Right. Welcome back. We're running on a very tight time schedule here, so we need to get moving very quickly. And we now begin the segment on the impact of low-income housing on national development. And it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Courtney Winter, who is a general manager of the Jamaica Mortgage Bank. The Jamaica Mortgage Bank, as you probably all know, is a statutory body within the housing portfolio of the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. During his time at the JMB, the bank has financed over 80 housing projects island-wide, including the state-of-the-art dormitories at the University of the West Indies. Mr. Winter sits on various housing-related committees within the ministry and was instrumental in the development of the national housing policy. Mr. Winter has served as Chief Financial Officer for COK Solidarity Cooperative Credit Union Limited, Consulting General Manager for 2 strategic subsidiaries of the Victoria Mutual Building Society, and Vice President Finance of the former Cable and Wireless Jamaica Flow. And he has spent 25 years working for various Fortune 100 companies in the USA, Europe, and the Caribbean before returning to Jamaica in 2007. He also volunteers his time for a number of things, both private and non-profit boards, and of course is chairman of his alma mater, which we would expect. He's a justice of the peace and a lay magistrate and a mentor. It gives me great pleasure to introduce him and to ask him to address us on the topic of the impact of low-income housing on national development. Mr. Winter.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And I want to thank the JDA for inviting me as well. It's very difficult to go after Wayne, but I will do my best to contextualize how I think low-income housing can really be a low-income, a low-hanging fruit in the development. I have presented on some of this before, but I need to put it in proper context. I am one person who honestly believes that low-income housing is a low-hanging fruit, as I said before, in terms of national development and growth. And I hope my friend Wayne would agree with me. So to put it in proper context, I need to go back to COVID and the impact coming out of COVID, and proper contextualize why I think that low-income housing makes sense. Hopefully some of the developers also agree. So we had this severe shock, probably the worst in 100 years, called COVID. And it had severe impact globally and in global markets. Coming out of COVID, what we saw was supply chain issues, which created a wider gap between demand and supply in many areas, including supply of raw material, aggregates, and so forth for housing. It was exacerbated by geopolitical conflicts in Europe, primarily the Russia-Ukraine issue, where we saw that a lot of the grain coming out of the Ukraine was impacted. And because of that, we had very low productivity. In the Jamaican context, we had a virtual shutdown. I think the government, in its wisdom at the time, decided to keep certain segments or certain sectors open, one of which was the construction sector to a certain extent. And so we were not immune to the impact of COVID and the resultant low productivity. And so what we saw was a disruption in global economies, right? the result of COVID was global inflation. In many other countries, there was recession, right? The Jamaica construction sector got hit with significant increases in steel, in lumber, and aggregates. In fact, I think we saw where steel, lumber went up by about 308% at one point, right? Now, because of this, the central banks globally had to intervene to manage inflation, especially with rate increases. And Jamaica, again, was not immune to these rate increases. In fact, our central bank increases policy rate from about 0.5% to 7% over, I believe, 5 quarters. Very fast increase in its rate in order to manage inflation. And as expected with any global shocks, especially the one of the significance of COVID, immediately banks start to tighten credit, right? The risk of Jamaica construction sector increase because banks think that they were overexposed. So then all of what I just said created what I consider to be a negative impact on the input costs of housing, right? The increase in bank lending rates meant higher financing costs to developers, in some cases by 4 to 6 percentage points. We saw an increase in residential mortgages, right? Between 3 to 5%. In fact, I think there was one financial institution, I'm not calling any names, went as high as about 12.48% in terms of their residential mortgage rate. Some pre-approved purchasers had to cancel sales contract that they had for pre-sales. And some banks have lowered their LTV lending, even now, 2 years out of COVID. And that has created a tightening of the market. Banks have also tightened the loan requirements for developers, where they have moved to require 100% pre-sales with 100% pre-approval of the end users. And we think that that stifled the sector somewhat. So housing prices as a result, because developers have to shift those increased input costs to the price of the homes or take a hit on their margins, right? So we have seen housing prices compared to before COVID move from about 20% to 25%. And in some cases, in the higher end of the market, we are seeing increases up to about 30%. We are seeing an increase in inventory. And by the way, this is based on JMB's internal data plus information that we follow in the marketplace. We are seeing increased inventory. Speaking to real estate agents, they will tell you that they are seeing increased inventory, especially in the higher end of the market. We're seeing longer time between LUs and closing. The banks are taking a little longer time, averaging 90 to now 180 days from the time they issue an LU. And that doesn't go down well for the sector in general, because if there's no other sector that is true in the construction sector, time is money. So if you have an LU process that is taking 90 days than the usual, we're talking about 90 days of per diem of interest that develop, and that has to be passed on somewhat. And because of that, we're seeing a competitive rental market developing for investors. The PIOJ has also reported 6 consecutive quarters of negative growth in the construction sector. And that's a clear indication that there's a slight slowdown in the construction sector and more so in the residential segment. we are seeing construction delays, and I don't have to mention any particular names, but you have heard it in the news, and you if you're following the market, you will see that there's also an increase in receivership and auction. All of those things are clear indication that we're having some slowdown in the construction and particular in the residential market. However, I think we can all agree that the effective demand for housing in Jamaica is really in the low to middle income segment. There's very low conversion and very low market risk. And when I say market risk, meaning if you were to build, construct or develop in the low income areas or segment of the market, you don't have hands to sell those units. So the data hopefully will speak for itself. So low income to low middle income.
Hello.
Are you hearing me?
Yes,
Yes.
I'm here. Yes,
Oh,
I'm
okay.
here.
So the government, as we know, the government have announced a target of about 70,000 units. We know from our data that the ROI, which is return on investment for projects done by the GMB, and I think being around for 52 years and collecting all of this data, we know that developers will probably have a return of about 21% and a return of equity that exceeds sometimes about 80%, depending on the project itself. It is a very reasonable, or I would dare to say, higher than usual return, and probably only the stock market in some areas that will give you that kind of return. Now, we did some math within the Jamaica Mortgage Bank, and the government has set a target for low income ranging from about $8 million to about $10 million per unit. If we were to look at the mix between with that 70,000 in mind, between lots, because some people really require lots to build their own shelter and building of units. What we will see, just moving very quickly, is that to maintain a developer's return of about 20 to 21%, based on the math, using about $5.5 million as the all-in cost for a low-income home at 70,000, that to build out the government's target of 70,000 homes will cost about $350 to $380 billion with a B. Now, I believe that is probably about 1/3 of the annual budget of Jamaica. So what we at the Jamaica Mortgage Bank, or me, Courtney Winter, think is that if we were to spend that type of money to meet the demands that exist in housing, especially low-income housing, and stimulate the economy, we would see significant growth in the economy by just developing low-income housing. Now, I wanted to throw this slide in because I know my friend Wayne just spoke about resilient housing, and the convention in Jamaica is block and steel. But I had visited with modular containerized home, which they claim can withstand, for example, a Cat 5 hurricane. And so in addition to building block and steel for resilient houses, we may want to explore that also the possibility of containerized homes, which delivered could be about 6 million. Now, I know there are individuals who are saying, well, containerized homes are really for individual purposes. But similar to what is done in other jurisdictions. What people know is have a negative connotation of like trailer homes. Infrastructure were built for parks where trailers can park and have the infrastructure in place. So that is something I also wanted to throw in there in terms of low-income homes. So getting back to national development, we believe, or I believe, that the opportunity for economic growth and development is really on the supply side of housing, which is really spending 350 to 380 billion over time to meet the demands for low-income housing. So, we know the NHT spends quite a bit annually, about 12 billion or more on trying to meet the demands or their targets on an annual basis. We know private developers using their own resources or borrowing spend about 30 billion, other government agencies about 12. However, there is still a gap for us to on the supply side. And one of the recommendation is really to look at things like pension funds. And I know Jamaica is ultra conservative in the use of pension funds, but we are seeing other jurisdictions such as the Chilean model where they use pension funds and REITs for the development. And as we know, Chile was at one point one of the fastest growing economies in the world. There are other ways to fund the supply side of housing. For example, and we're just beginning to look at other areas such as factoring, where we sell off or factor a portion of our residential mortgage receivables in order to bring forward liquidity to be able to supply homes. The last time I checked, the big 5 banks had about $400 billion of mortgage receivables, which can be unlocked to use for low-income housing. We need to create and deepen the securities market by creating a residential mortgage-backed facility where you can package these loans, and it's done in other jurisdictions. I know there's concern about what happened in 2008, but what happened in 2008 did not severely impact Jamaica other than in the securities market, but not really because of the real estate practices of Jamaica. We learned our lessons, I think, in 2000, back in 1990, and the BOJ took steps to prevent what happened in 2008 from happening. It didn't severely impact, that is, the failure of the housing market in Europe. What affected Europe, based on my research, was really the exposure to the markets in the United States and the securities, the real estate securities in the United States. So I also think that the FIs, financial institution, could take a little more risk and invest in low-income housing. And there's always public-private partnerships with the government. As an indirect investor, we should also look at REITs. And this is primarily for the rental market. We can provide REITs for anything that has an income stream. We're seeing in other jurisdictions where REITs are used not only for the rental market, but also to build stadiums, to build certain infrastructure, theaters, anywhere that you have a income stream or a monthly income stream, parking garages, you can use REITs, which is then used to repay or finance those REITs. We could create and offer diaspora bonds so that the diaspora can participate in the development of residential homes and the construction industry. Now, we know, I don't have to show this slide, but developers know that for every dollar spent in construction, the government earns quite a bit. I think the math could be about 25% in terms of taxes and, you know, stamp duty, contractor levies, GCT, then you have stamp duty on mortgages, registration, transfer taxes, increased property taxes on developed land, all kind of different taxes. So that again is a win-win for government. And then there's a multiply effect of about 3 times for every spending. So we have an indirect spin-off when we invest in construction and in housing in particular. There's the hardware stores, the mom and pop stores, the vending, aggregators, local aggregators, and so forth. And then, you know, we talk about the skilled laborers, unskilled laborers, the professionals, engineers, architects, quantity surveyors, contractors, all the professionals that are associated with construction. And I still believe in my heart that there's absolutely no need to import any skill to build homes in Jamaica. So I just want to conclude and to maintain the time that is given, that we still think that the opportunities really in the supply side of housing, and given the significant shortfall in the demand for especially low to middle income, we still think that developers can retain the type of returns that they enjoy in the high end of the market. There is no marketing risk, because if you were to announce tomorrow morning that you're building 1,000 homes, anywhere between 8 to 10 million and even up to $25 million, you will not have hands to sell those homes. So you don't have the marketing risk. What you will have is a construction risk. And so you can get in and get out and still retain the type of returns that you're enjoying on the high end of the market. If we're serious about housing and to meet the demand for housing, housing can be a serious driver for economic development and national development. So I implore the government, private sector to join hands and take a serious look at looking at low to middle income housing versus the issues that we're now having in the market with the higher end homes. There are also innovative ways to fund homes and housing development, both in the private, as a private investor, a developer, financial institution, and of course, government has a huge part to play. So if there's anyone who wants a little more, then these are our contact information at the Jamaica Mortgage Bank. And that will conclude my presentation. I want to thank you very much again for the invite. Let me apologize for the panelists that is going to follow me, because they now have to answer the questions based on my presentation. But thanks again, and we will, I guess the moderator will moderate the panel after this presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Winter. That was a very interesting and informative presentation. Well, we're going to go to a short break at the moment, and after that we'll have the Q&A sessions, and I'll introduce the panelists at that stage of the game. But just to remind everybody that if you do have any questions that they want to send in, please use the Q&A icon. Don't use the chat icon, use the Q&A icon. But I'll repeat that again after the commercial break. So we now go to a commercial break. Thank you very much.
Let's face it, buying a home can be quite stressful and costly. At JN Bank, we understand you have big plans for the future. That is why we've created mortgage options suited to your needs, with almost no money down, unsecured loans to cover upfront costs, and flexible payment plans. We're committed to making the home buying process possible. Let JN Bank make your goal of owning a home a reality. Contact us today and take the first steps towards owning your own sweet home. JN Bank will help you find a way.
Embrace the future. Build cleaner. Build greener. Build with Carib Cement.
Solutions. Support. Service. Smart AI features. DigiView Security Limited. Human detection. Line crossing. License plate recognition. 180-degree camera view. 360-degree camera view. Multiple angle view. Face recognition.
For over 40 years, the GN Group of companies have been developing plans, laying foundations, building hundreds of homes of distinction, creating exclusive and secure communities in which we live, play, and raise families. The GN Group of companies, creating homes that people enjoy.
Right, we're back again. Welcome back, everybody. The time has come for the Q&A segment of this presentation, and we have four panelists who I shall introduce very briefly, because as I said, we're on a very tight time schedule and it's a long webinar. First of all, we have Mr. Carlton Earl Samuels, CD, who is the Assistant General Manager of the JN Group, overseeing development financing. With over 30 years in the housing sector, Mr. Samuels is a chartered accountant with an MBA in Finance and Management from FIU and a certificate in Housing Finance from Wharton. He has served on boards for many organizations, including the Sugar Industry Housing, the National Housing Corporation, the Caribbean Association of Housing Finance Institutions, the Caribbean Association of Banks. And in 2006, he was honored by the government and conferred with the Order of Distinction, Commander Class, for his contributions to Jamaica's housing sector. Secondly, we have Ms. Vanessa Lala Singh, Legal Officer and Company Secretary of Jamaica Mortgage Bank. She's an attorney at law, experienced in corporate and commercial law, conveyancing, and data protection. She joined the JMB team in January 2024, and has practiced law in multiple industries, including commercial banking, real estate, and technology solutions. She is an avid world traveler and an aspiring polyglot. I had to look up that word, by the way. She's a proud graduate of Alden High School, UWI Mona, and the Norman Manley Law School. Next, we have Mr. Carl Eugene Vendries, known as Gene, who is the founding broker of Millennium Properties, bringing decades of experience to Jamaica's real estate industry. He started his career at Seprod and Price Waterhouse, and later co-founded JMBS Properties. He's known for his ethical approach and has played a key role in shaping Jamaica's real estate regulations, and is widely respected for his leadership and dedication to client service. He is deeply involved in community engagement, including contributions to Habitat for Humanity, reflecting his commitment to making a positive impact. We also have Mrs. Patricia Burke, who is a seasoned credit professional and has worked in the financial industry for the past 25 years. She's the Director of Business Operations at the Jamaica Mortgage Bank and is responsible for interim construction loan financing and the monitoring of housing and commercial projects being financed by the bank. Her role also entails oversight of the mortgage indemnity insurance, a product of the government of Jamaica, which facilitates early home ownership. When she's not working, her time is spent hiking, swimming, watching movies and football, and doing church-related activities. It is now my pleasure to open the floor for question and answers. And of course, as I mentioned before, please use the Q&A icon for this purpose. Don't use the chat icon, and we'll get along much better on that. Thank you very much indeed. And now the panelists, I've opened the floor to you.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to make a comment, and it is a concern that I've had since being in the housing sector for over 30 years. And it is a definition of low-income housing. There is no doubt from studies that have been done, several countries, that housing the lower income sector of the society has contributed significantly to the national development of those countries and stability and so on. But when we talk about low-income housing, are we referring to housing that can be afforded by the majority of the workers who earn the, say, $15,000 per week, which is a significant portion of the population? And is there any developer who is willing to build houses for that sector of the market without deep subsidy and the development costs? And the subsidy logically will have to come from government. And so we need to look at that. I think Courtney's presentation, which is quite good, but I'm not sure that I see where the suggestion will contribute to income earners at that level. I think even the National Housing Trust, a significant portion of their contributors, even with 0% interest rate. And you'll have to provide houses at prices of maybe $4 million or less for them to afford those homes. And to do so, the developers will have to be incentivized. And there are several ways in which those incentives can be put in place. For example, the waiver of GCT and other inputs. Courtney spoke to the high taxes that is paid to the government in various forms, in the conveyancing process and so on. Ways in which we can look at how we either eliminate or waive those for potential homeowners at the lowest level. Because low-income housing or housing for workers at the lower level, it creates a better environment for the country and for which we can carry on our economic activities. Those are my brief comments, and I'll say more as we progress.
Would you like to respond to that, Winter?
Yeah. So in general, I agree with Earl. if you look at this, there are various definitions of low income, but in the Jamaican context, I think it's we're banning around this 15,000. But I think at a macro level, what I'm saying is where the effective demand is, we need to take a serious look at that segment of the market. I will agree with Earl that some of it is going to require subsidy from the government. If one of my slides, I mentioned that the 350 to 380 billion did not include land. And I also mentioned about PPPs, which is the private-public partnership with the government. So given the timeline that I have, I didn't want to go into all of that detail. So I'm happy that Earl brought it up. But yeah, in general, I agree with Earl that in order to meet the demand in terms of the definition of low income, it would require significant subsidy from the government. And, if you look, for example, at containerized homes, perhaps what the government could do is provide the land, provide the infrastructure, and put 100 or 200 containerized homes for individuals who is in that segment. So yeah, I'm in agreement with Earl on most of his comments.
Thank you very much. Maybe we could just go to the first of the questions coming in from those who have joined us. Kerry Scott asks, how many houses are currently needed to satisfy the demand, and how well are we meeting those needs?
Pat, you want to take that?
Yes, I can take that. Good morning, everyone. There is a need for approximately 15,000 houses annually. And over the past years, especially the past 5 or so years, the average number of units being developed hovers around 3,000 units at the higher end. Now, with a 15,000 demand and only meeting just a small fraction, you understand that the demand widens and increases, and we're not filling that gap. Now, the Prime Minister has announced a very ambitious target of the 70,000 houses. And so we are playing catch up in trying to achieve that target. Now, based on the design as outlined by the government, most of these developments will be done primarily by the government agencies such as the NHD, the HAG, and Jamaica Mortgage Bank, of course, within that mix. But we are woefully short of fulfilling that 15,000 annual demand.
And I should add, Pat, that 15,000 was based on a study that was done back in 2009. And since then, we have not met 15,000. So it has accumulated. So there's a significant shortage and demand for housing in Jamaica.
And primarily that demand exists within the lower income category. And when you scan the market, you recognize that houses within the sweet spot of the $8 million and the $10 million price point is not available. So that even further increases the realities of what exists within Jamaica.
May I make a comment, Chair? What do we mean by demand? To me, demand has to be linked with affordability. So is it effective demand or is just a figure that we just, how was this figure determined?
Not sure.
You mean by?
I'm not sure whether we're talking about affordability here or just people who would like to be able to afford.
Absolutely. That is why I want us to define demand, whether it is effective demand based on affordability or people who would like houses.
Aspired.
Either way you look at it, Earl, whether you want to talk about effective demand or affordability, what we're seeing is within a certain price point, you don't have a marketing issue. For example, we know that the NHT will lend a couple up to $15 million. We know that if you have a third party, you can get up to 21 million. If the homes that are being built in the Old Harbor, Spanish Town area for $14-15 million, those homes, right? Those may not be considered low-income homes, but from an affordability perspective, those homes are selling. We see them coming into the mortgage bank every single day. So what we're talking about is the lower end of the market, whichever way you want to define it.
But Courtney, those are not low-income houses.
No. I agree that those that are not low income. But I don't want you to miss the point. The point
I
is,
haven't missed the point at all, and this is my beef for a long time. We beat around the bush. What is low-income housing?
I think we just agreed that for low-income housing, which you had defined as $15,000 a week, that there would need to be significant subsidizing of those units by the government. My bigger point is that we are suggesting that developers and others that participate in the whole business of housing to look at the lower end of the market, whether that is low income or low middle income or even middle income. There's a mic that is open. What we're saying is that segment of the market, there is significant demand and affordability within that segment of the market. We are saying that based on especially now the conditions of the market, that if I were a developer to go to Kingston 6, Kingston 8, Kingston 7, Kingston 10, at this price point that we're seeing of 42 million, that market is diminishing. So why not look to operate in the lower end of the market, maybe up to about $25-28 million, where you don't have the market risk? You get in, you get out, because those, if you were to put 100 of those units anywhere in Jamaica, well, not anywhere, it will sell, and we're seeing that, and we are experiencing that as well.
Yep. Maybe the next question follows on from this, and maybe gives us an incentive to maybe clarify the answers. This Mark Farquharson says that Mr. Winter touched on innovative ways to fund development, construction of housing. The use of pension funds piqued my interest. What might be some of the risks involved in using pension funds to do the same, if any?
Yeah. So, well, let me not hog up the panel. I don't know if someone else wants to take the question.
Sure, I guess I could start that one. So, using pension funds to finance development, we have to remember that the pension funds are they're limited by law in what they can do and what they can invest in. But I will say that the regulations were amended to open up, the scope of investments that pension funds can go into, leasing of real estate and also what they consider other classes of investment. So the first thing is that any pension fund would have to make sure that they're abiding by the Pension Superannuation and Retirement Schemes Act, and also look at their own pension rules. But the overarching thing with a pension fund is to make sure that you are investing within that pension fund specific risk appetite. So you'd really have to look very closely at, what is the return on investment that you think will come out of this. So I would put it forward that in looking at low to middle income housing, this could be, a safer bet than perhaps going into the higher income market if a pension fund was looking to invest in real estate. And also to mitigate risk, you could look at investing in some derivatives of the housing market. So Mr. Winter in his presentation had mentioned, REITs and real estate backed mortgage, REBs and those kind of things. You could look at those where there's a little bit of a buffer. The mortgage bank administers the MII, which is also something that some commercial banks use to mitigate the risk behind their mortgages. So there are a lot of little things that can help mitigate the risk for a pension fund in looking at this, but it's certainly something that I think is worth exploring. And lastly, just to say as well, following on from the conversation that was happening earlier, yes, when we're looking specifically, Mr. Sam, at the low income demand, I see a passion there. And we're saying, well, it's going to require a lot of, government investment, etc. I mean, I think regardless of the sitting government, it is acknowledged that it's a problem. We've seen across administrations that there are things that developers can take advantage of, not just the public-private partnerships, really those joint ventures where you can go with the government. Certainly looking at financing through places like the mortgage bank. I don't want the rhetoric out there to be that, there's no point in trying in this. There are different avenues to help finance these kinds of developments.
Can I just, the reason why I look at the pension, not only that it works in some jurisdiction, and again, you have to look at the culture as well. But if you look at what is in finance that is called duration, you have mortgages that are on the books of financial institution that goes up to 30 years. You also have pension liability on the other side that goes up to 30 years. So if you match those durations, you have a perfect match. And that's why pension is so is such a good attractive funding, but it has to be done within a certain regime to mitigate some of the risk, as Ms. Allison mentioned.
And also with the mitigation of the risk, you also make a better return on the pension fund investment.
Yes.
It's all about risk management, because certainly an investment in housing projects is a major investment. So all the due diligence would need to be done to ensure that the risk is worth it and the reward is likewise forthcoming for it. But certainly think about also the benefits of investment within the construction industry, within the housing sector, where it improves people's lives. It also contributes to economic development and trickles down to various sectors. Mr. Winter mentioned in terms of the different parties that would benefit from this sort of investment: the professionals, the cabinet makers, the hardware store owners. Just a ripple effect right across.
Yeah. I'm going to take two of the questions that are coming in together because they sort of match. An anonymous attendee says, when looking at the cost of developing homes at the NHT allotment price, how would you suggest we drive down the cost of development to reach those needed to build build and infrastructure costs? And he goes on to say, currently, I believe there are large costs when it comes to the developer having to pay for connections for utilities, which then need to be passed on to the buyer of the home, as well as import duties, etc., for actual material of building the homes. And then Kerry Scott says, do you think introducing low-income housing would reset the pricing structure within the market. Who wants to take that one?
You want to go, Earl?
Don't ask
Yes, yeah, I could take that. But the first part of the question about how
you
to
suggest we drive down the cost of development?
how we suggest we drive down the cost. For example, the infrastructure cost is a significant cost in any development. And by infrastructure, I'm not only referring to input of roads and so on, but to bring the services, utility, water, light, water, and so on to the site. Those are costs to the project. Those costs could be written off over a longer period. For example, they could be recovered in taxes tied to the included as a part of the property tax, so that the owner or the purchaser of those units would pay for those services over time instead of pay those services being included in the upfront cost of the units. So that is one way of trying to bring down the cost and make the units more affordable. There are several strategies which can be employed. Also, as I said earlier, which is one of my beef, because no developer, apart from maybe the housing trust, the housing corporation, and so on, is going into the development for as a charity purpose. So they must be making a reasonable return on their investment. And so in order for them to bring in the units to the market at a lower price, then the government, without taking the money up front, could help to cushion those costs. Because we have to look at the impact of providing houses at the lower level. It also stabilizes the community. It lowers crime because people live in a organized and structured way. So housing is a major stabilizer in any society. So there should be all effort made to make housing affordable, even at the lowest income level. And when I use the $15,000 per week, I was more matching it with minimum wage. Although a lot of these people are not earners at that level are not, they don't pay taxes and so on, or contribute, a lot of them don't contribute to the NHT unless as voluntary contributors. So they can't benefit from those incentives from the NHT. So we should find ways of bringing those people into the housing sector to try to normalize that.
Yeah, some additional ways that we could look at bringing down housing is, as you mentioned, the government taxes. We're seeing several years ago when we reduced, for example, transfer tax to 2%, that stimulated the housing sector. So we should look at stuff like that. We should also look at the material. We should look at innovative ways. For example, modular homes. I've seen demonstration where folks can produce 100 homes per day. And that kind of economies of scale will also reduce the cost of homes. So we should look at innovation in terms of home building, but to maintain the resilience, we could look at how government tax the whole value chain of home building. As well as additional government incentives and subsidiaries.
Yeah, one of the things that has piqued the interest of a number of the persons posing questions is the whole container situation. And one says containers for housing is scarce because of global steel shortage and technically challenging for the income group being targeted. That's not really a question, it's a statement, and perhaps there's some truth in it. Donna Daly says, good morning. Mr. Winter suggested that the containerized houses should be placed at particular, sorry, that has gone. Just a moment. Yeah, Mr. Winter suggested that the containerized houses should be placed at particular locations on land provided by the government. Would that come at an additional cost for leasing of the land? How will water supply and light be dealt with, or do these houses come equipped with these facilities? I rather don't.
Right. So I equate it to, and again, I don't like to use this term because there's a negative connotation, but there's what they call trailer parks in the United States. So the vision here would be the government provide the land and the infrastructure, meaning each container home comes with a connectivity to light, it comes with connectivity to water, and you would have to connect also to sewer. So the government provides the land and the infrastructure. And what we're talking about here is a modular containerized home that they can deliver once the infrastructure is in place. And in 1 week, you have a home. So the point I'm trying to make is that we have to go beyond the conventional way of providing homes and still maintain the resilience. And based on my research, there are container homes that can withstand a Cat 5 hurricane. And they look beautiful. They look dignified. And once done correctly, you have a pretty decent 1 or 2 bedroom.
Yeah. We're rapidly running out of time. And
Yeah.
But there's one comment here. There's one comment on this containers. The other thing we'll have to consider is whether mortgage institutions, banks, and even the NHT, whether they will be prepared to give a loan, a mortgage against a containerized home.
I leave that to the banks. Banks deal with risk. If the risk is no different from building a home somewhere else in Jamaica, then I don't see why a bank would not want to give a loan. But again,
just yeah, I agree.
And I think a part of it is just if some of these things, if we try them, and see, I know the risk is there, and that's what we're all concerned about. But I do think that once a market is tested, if demand is there, the market adjusts.
Well, just a comment to close out this, because as I said, we're rapidly running out of time. And this comment comes from Mr. H.D. Thompson. Good morning. Containerized housing also has some concerns regarding security, indoor air quality and ventilation, insulation and mold control, responsive container to climate change and increasing temperatures. Not a question, a statement, but
they can be insulated. I've seen ones that are insulated.
I've seen those.
And have good ventilations as well.
Yeah, anyway, thanks very much for that. Unfortunately, we can't answer all the questions. We run out of time on this, and we have to keep things very tight, as you can imagine. I thank you all very much for the interesting discussions and the new thoughts, and thinking outside of the box on many of these things. So we reached a stage now where we go to the next commercial break, and after that we will have an introduction to Jamaica, to JN Properties Limited, which is our main sponsor. And I'm sure that will give us a little break before we head into the next segment dealing with covenant modifications and things related to that. So thank you all very much. And we now go on to a commercial break.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For a century and a half, JN has been committed to improving the lives of every Jamaican, from yard to abroad, a legacy of growing with you every step of the journey.
Across the globe, our roots unite and remind us of our collective strength. We have made homeownership easier for Jamaicans at home and across the diaspora. JN Money continues to keep family and friends connected by making remittances easy and convenient. Embracing the digital era with the acquisition of an international banking system, a groundbreaking One JN Passport app, JN Pay Wallet and other payment solutions, JN is enhancing service to our members.
We continue to care for communities, always moving forward in every generation.
JN Group, we'll help you find a way.
Right, we're back again, and it is time to introduce the Platinum sponsor presentation. And it is my pleasure to invite Lieutenant Colonel retired Garfield Prendergast, who is Managing Director of JN Properties, to address us. He joined Jamaica National Building Society in January 2014 as the executive administration and managed the services department as a part of his portfolio of responsibilities. He was appointed general manager of JN Properties on the 1st of February 2017 and appointed managing director on 15 March 2024. He has a lot of management and leadership experience and served as a commissioned officer in the Jamaica Defense Force for 32 years. He was also seconded from the JDF to the post of Commissioner of Corrections, Department of Correctional Services during the period 22nd March 2010 to 30 June 2013. Lieutenant Colonel Prendergast, the floor is yours.
Good morning to everybody on the webinar at this point. I'd just like to say thank you to the moderator and to the association for giving me the opportunity here to introduce my company, JN Properties Limited. Let me go straight into the presentation. All right, JN Properties is a company that was formed back in 1984. So we're not a new company. However, at the time, and up until fairly recently, within the last year or two, we were focused with providing services, property management, project management services within the JN Group. The company, however, was restructured in 2017 when the Building Society converted to the bank and to a wider group of companies. And with that change, a decision was made for us to not only focus on providing top-class services within the group, but also to offer the same high-grade services external to the group as well. Our aim was to create and maintain appropriate, effective, and economical property-related experiences that align to strategic objectives and support people in doing their best work in the corporate setting, or to experience enriching personal comfort in the residential setting every day, wherever they are. Now, the management team comprises myself. You got a little a short introduction to my profile. I have two managers working with me. Kerry Scott, who has asked a couple of questions already in this setting. He's the head of our real estate and properties arm. And Andrew Wilson, who is also attending, is the head of our facilities and projects. Both these gentlemen have over 20 years of experience in their areas of responsibility and a proven track record in providing these services to or within the group for many, many decades. Just to give you an idea of how significant our portfolio is right now, managed properties. We're currently managing about 137 individual properties, a total of over 550,000 square feet. And there's a good mix of commercial and residential properties in that listing. So we already have a significant property portfolio that we manage, and we are seeking to introduce our services now to the wider public, whether it be in Jamaica or the diaspora, whether they are in the UK, the USA, Canada, and so on. The main office services that we offer: project management. We are now, as one can imagine, under the current Jamaican legislation, we would have to be a real estate dealership in order to offer these services to the wider public and not just within the group. So we got our real estate dealership license. We're now registered and licensed with the Real Estate Board, and we're now members of the Realtors Association of Jamaica and also the National Association of Realtors in the US. So we have, it wasn't a change in the services. All the real estate services that we are able to provide were being done in the group, but to go external to the group, we had to have this, and we have achieved that and started, in fact, offering our services to third-party clients and institutions. We are also well seasoned in providing project management services, property development services, and advisory services. Now, at this stage, I'll just go through a bit. Much of this is not going to be new to the persons attending who are part of the association, but I'll just reiterate some of the main benefits that we provide under, say, for instance, property management services and the others. One of the main positives we believe that we bring to the table is, in fact, our affiliation, association, and birth from the JN group. Every aspect of service that we provide, we also have close relationships with our other subsidiaries within the JN group. So if somebody comes to us for services and needs financing, then JN Bank, there's a hop, skip, and a jump over to the persons from JN Bank who would be able to assist with financing of various kinds. We have insurance, the need for insurance coverage for whether it is during the project or after. We have an affiliation with JN General Insurance that will help with that. And we also have an entity called JN Fund Managers that will help in creative ways of financing projects and the various services that we do. They have been known to put together REITs and other investment tools to finance many of the projects that the Developers Association would be interested in. So under property management services, we help with preparing property performance reports, property valuations, doing investment property analyses, budgeting and marketing research to make sure that what you're getting into is feasible on a financial level. Collecting or vetting possible contracts with property maintenance services, service providers, security, landscaping, janitorial, you name it. We have experience in getting all of these contractual arrangements put in place. We also help with the collection of rent, security deposits, insurance payments, debt collection proceedings. All of that falls under our the service provision that we do. Under the real estate dealership services, we do all the normal real estate dealership activities, meaning buying and selling properties, leasing and rental services. And this includes, of course, vetting possible tenants, making sure that the tenants that you go into business with are able to provide the financial payments that are going to be needed for maintaining the property. So we deal with investment properties, development properties. We do membership on or attend Strata Association meetings for our clients and manage the entire process of owner-tenant interaction. Under project management, we have a lot of experience here. I won't go through all of this because of the shortages of time. However, we go through the all phases of the project management cycle. And what I'd like to say is we have a lot of experience here in documenting from initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and control, and handover, that entire process, all of it, making sure that projects are completed to specification, they're delivered on time and within the approved budget. We have a lot of success demonstrably documented to show that we have a system in place that can work to make sure their projects are successful. This goes through a lot of the details in what we go through in project management. I won't go through all of these, but just to let those listening understand that we go through and we take each phase of the project management cycle very seriously, making sure that we represent our clients in the best way. Under property development and advisory services, we also have a lot of experience under these two headings, whether it is sourcing properties, purchasing properties for renovation or development, leasing of the properties, and improving asset value and the financial performance of each property to the best benefit of the client. Advisory services is a catch-all. It provides, or we provide, advice on all property-related activities and document these for your decision-making. I want to, at this stage, just mention that one of the benefits of, as I said before, of engaging with JN Properties Limited is us being members of the JN Group. We are a subsidiary under the JN Group, and the JN Group has built a reputation over, a very long time of being professional and in integrity, showing proper integrity and professionalism in all that we do. And I think it is a part of the DNA of all the subsidiaries to make sure that the group maintains its excellent reputation on the international stage and locally. I'll wrap up by giving you all the means of contacting us. We have our website that is coming on stream and being developed as we speak. We have our email address, jnpropertiesltd@jngroup.com, and we have those phone number contacts there. I understand that these presentations are going to be shared, so we are eager to hear from anyone who is in need of the services from JN Properties. Okay, at this stage, I will terminate. That's my presentation. Short and sweet, I believe. And I hand back to Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel Prendergast. And thank you very much to JN Properties, who is our sterling sponsor. And, without them, they're very helpful to us. And thank you very much for just encapsulating those attributes, which I'm sure many of us are very, very accustomed to and appreciate. The next topic is going to be navigating covenant modification, legal guidelines, and neighbor relations. And our presenter is a young attorney by the name of Mr. Matthew Royal from Myers, Fletcher & Gordon. And he is an associate in that firm's litigation department with significant experience as lead and instructing counsel in matters before the Court of Appeal, Supreme Court, Industrial Disputes Tribunal. Matthew's practice focuses on commercial and civil litigation to include local and cross-border contractual disputes, contentious intellectual property claims dealing with trademark and copyright infringement and passing off. Land disputes involving contentious restrictive covenant applications, adverse possession, and disputes arising from commercial lease agreements, as well as constitutional law and judicial review of decisions of public bodies. That is quite a mouthful. Matthew also maintains an active labor and industrial relations desk, if he doesn't have enough to do, where he advises and represents large-scale employers in the tourism, manufacturing, and transport sectors. Mr. Matthew Royal, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Afif. Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for having me today. This morning's topic, I hope you can all see my screen. This morning's topic is navigating covenant modifications, legal guidelines, and neighbor relations. Our focus for this presentation will be on recent decisions of our courts regarding real estate developments relating to the modification, discharge of restrictive covenants, as well as the application of development orders to developments. Just to provide an overview as to what to expect as we go through, we'll start with the introduction I just gave. We're to look at restrictive covenants and development orders to understand a little better what they are. We'll go into some analysis of the recent decisions which are of relevance to us today, and then speak about the kind of enhanced due diligence and impact that these decisions have on how we manage things from a transactional perspective as well. Some of the legislation that we have covered in this presentation include the Town and Country Planning Act, the Restrictive Covenants Discharge and Modification Act, and the Registration of Titles Act. So, an explanation or assessment of what restrictive covenants are. Restrictive covenants initially start out as contractual terms between the vendor of property and the purchaser. Usually, they come about when a person is purchasing a subdivision of a larger lot, and the restrictive covenants are imposed by that vendor to control the use of the neighboring subdivided lots. The law allows for the benefit and burden of the covenants to run with the land, therefore binding successive owners of the respective properties. So you will find that a subdivision occurred as far back as 100 years ago, and the covenant, the benefits and burdens of it continue to run with the land, binding the present owners of the various properties. These covenants are usually endorsed on the certificate of title. Now, the nature of the covenants, they generally tend to control or restrict what you can do with your land. Some of them are common covenants that you'll encounter: restrict or prohibit multifamily development, prevent commercial use of the property where the character of the neighborhood is intended to be principally residential, control the number of buildings that can be built on the lot, the distance of the buildings from the neighboring lot boundaries, as well as distances from roadways. So essentially, there are contractual terms that govern and control use of land. Restrictive covenants apply or can be enforced by neighboring properties which have the benefit of them. So where your use of or intended use of your land violates a restrictive covenant, they can be enforced by that neighboring property. Enforcement options are varied. They can obtain interim and or permanent injunctions to stop the development work to the extent that that work is inconsistent with the covenant. Mandatory injunctions can also be obtained to compel the property owner to alter an existing development or alter the work that has been done to bring back the property in conformity with the covenant. So that might even mean tearing down structures that have been built. And of course, damages, monetary compensation is also available to the objecting party in circumstances where the breach cannot otherwise be remedied. Enforcement, of course, is avoided by successfully applying to have the offended covenant discharged or modified. Discharge means to remove or delete the covenant. Modification edits the terms of the covenant to make it compatible with the intended work. The legislation prescribes 4 criteria for the successful application to discharge or modify a covenant. One is that the person is entitled to the benefit of the covenant or consent to the covenant being discharged or have offered no objection from which consent is inferred. The other is that the covenant is deemed to be obsolete due to changes in the character of the neighborhood. And the question that the court asks itself there is, what does a purchaser in that relevant neighborhood expect to find when they're purchasing there? So this normally is a ground that comes up in litigation surrounding multifamily developments in traditionally single-family residential areas. The court would seek to define what parameter amounts to the neighborhood, and using the evidence of an expert, normally real estate agents, to come and say, based on the developments of that area over a particular span of time, the current characteristics of the houses within that locality, yes, the neighborhood has changed such that a purchaser along this avenue or in this area would expect to find multifamily developments, or the inverse, would not expect to find multifamily developments as a common feature of that neighborhood. And that would impact the court's determination of whether the covenant is deemed to be obsolete. Next ground, impeding reasonable use of land. That ground is generally interpreted very strictly. The impediment to the use of land doesn't mean that the best and highest possible use cannot be arrived at because of the covenant. It means that the covenant in its original purpose could not be performed, or the land cannot be used in compliance with the original covenant. One recurring theme in the judgment surrounding this particular ground, where people are seeking to modify covenants to permit multifamily developments, is that the court has said nothing within the locality prevents you from still complying with the covenant and building a single family development. Therefore, the covenant does not impede the reasonable use of the land and is not liable to be discharged. The last of them is that there's no injury to the persons entitled to the benefit of it. And what the court asks itself in that circumstance is whether the covenant as it exists today still secure a practical advantage to the persons entitled to benefit from it, and would the removal of that covenant result in injury to them. Commonly what you see claimed as injury in the litigation is covenants, and keep on using the example of multifamily developments, covenants that were aimed at restricting the neighborhood to single family developments are deemed to control or limit the density within the area, put less stress on water and sewage resources, for example. And the argument has been made that you're going to increase the density enormously by now having a lot that used to hold one family, holding 20 or 30 families, and creating traffic nuisances, which have all been accepted by the court as being injury to the persons entitled to benefit. Another common occurrence is the development of multi-story multifamily developments neighboring single-family lots, where from the second, third, or fourth floor of those developments, you can look into the backyard and front yard of other of the neighboring lots, resulting in an intrusion of the right to privacy in those circumstances. And so that has been the type of injury that the court has said the covenants exist to prevent against, and will not, and therefore will not modify the covenant in light of the risk of that injury. So those are the grounds, or the statutory grounds, for discharge or modification of the covenant. But it's interesting to note that the developer who is seeking to modify the covenant need only satisfy at least one of these grounds for discharge. But even where that ground is satisfied, the court still has a residual jurisdiction not to modify it. And we're coming to a case where that residual jurisdiction was applied shortly. Now, we're also looking at development orders because they too control or limit what you can do with your land. And what we see from the recent litigation, they can be utilized by neighboring lot owners to halt or restrict what you can do with your development. And also, some of the recent cases have applied the development orders as a part of the considerations as to whether or not the restrictive covenant discharge or modification that is applied for will be granted. So it's very relevant to the whole scheme of what your neighbors can do if they are disgruntled with the fact that you are pursuing a development beside them. Now, the development orders are created under Section 5 of the Town and Country Planning Act. The authority generates them after consultation with the relevant local authority. For example, the KSAMC, in the case of Kingston, St. Andrews, and the Pedro Keys, would have contributed to what was then the 2017 Provisional Development Order for that area. The development orders aim to control the development of land in the particular locality to which they apply. They secure proper sanitary condition and conveniences, coordination of roads and public services. They protect and extend the amenities and conserve and develop natural resources. So if you've ever read through one of the development orders, you will see that it essentially outlines a list of policies that govern various aspects of the development, how high you can build, how many people, how many habitable rooms are permissible based on the square footage of your lot, what slopage or gradients along which you are able or authorized to build on. It provides broad-ranging controls for the development of particular lots. The provisional development orders are so provisional in the first instance. They're subject to later confirmation by the minister. During the period of time that they remain provisional, an interested person may object to a particular policy under that if they, on the ground, that the order is for any reason impractical or unnecessary, or that it goes against the interests of the economic welfare of the local area. If there are no objections within a time specified under the Act, and the provisional order is deemed by the minister as likely to be in the public interest, he may issue a confirmation of the order. And we know that in April 2023, the provisional development order for Kingston, St. Andrews, and the Pedro Keys was confirmed with certain modifications that are listed in the gazetted order that was published in April of 2023. Now, how the provisional development order or the confirmed development order tends to apply. According to Section 11 of the TCPA, the local planning authority may grant permission unconditionally or subject to such conditions that they think fit or refuse permission. When that local planning authority is considering whether to grant the planning permission, they must give regard to the provisions of the development order so far as it is material and any other material consideration. And we'll come to the importance of that language, material consideration, when we look at one of the cases later on. So judicial decisions have given certain interpretations to these meanings, and that becomes or brings home the relevance of these orders to developers and financiers of developments. In terms of the cases, we'll be looking at three particular authorities: the first instance authority in Birdsucker Drive, the first instance judgment in the Upper Montrose case, as well as the 10 Roseberry Drive, and also the Court of Appeals input in the same Upper Montrose matter. So we'll start with Birdsucker. Owners and occupiers of properties neighboring a multifamily development on Birdsucker Drive commenced proceedings challenging the building and environmental approvals granted by the KSAMC. Some important features of the facts of that case are that previous registered proprietors, not the current developers, had obtained environmental approvals. So the original owners had environmental approvals, the new developer came in, did not obtain their own approval. The developers obtained environmental approvals in their names after work had already been commenced. And we'll see later on why this is an important feature of the facts of this case. Building approvals obtained before environmental approvals were obtained as well in this case. So what was decided? The building permit was unlawful since it was issued prior to the application for and the grant of the environmental permit by the NRCA. The reason of the court was as follows. Section 11(1)(a) of the TCPA provides that where the provisions of Section 9 of the NRCAA applies, planning permission shall not be granted unless an application is made to the authority and the authority has granted approval or signified in writing its intention to grant a permit. Section 9 of the NRCAA applies to areas, categories of enterprise, construction or development as prescribed by the minister in a published gazette. And it is also a criminal offense to build without the environmental permit having been obtained. The court also decided that the KSMC was required to take into account the minimum standards established under the 2017 Provisional Development Order, as this was a material consideration. Now, you recall that when we looked earlier at what the provisions of the TCPA are, it says that the authority is to have regard to development orders or other material considerations. And there was an argument before the court in Birdsucker that the provisional development orders are only that, just provisional, and therefore does not fall within the mandatory consideration of development orders. But what the court reasoned is that even though the provisional orders were not yet confirmed, they too amount to mandatory considerations, material considerations that the local authority ought to have addressed their minds to in granting the particular approval. The court reasoned that no evidence that the provisions of the provisional development order was contemplated, even in light of significant breaches of the policies set out in the relevant order. Therefore, the grant of the provision was deemed to have been unreasonable because the authority failed to consider things which they should have considered, which would have impacted the exercise of their discretion. Section 11(1) of the Act empowers the local authority to grant planning approvals with or without condition or refuse to grant approvals. In the exercise of this discretion, the local authority shall have regard to the provisions of the development order and any other material considerations. And the KSAMC argued that the provisional development orders were only guidelines and not binding. And of course, the court said they were material. This litigation ensued in 2020. We now have a situation where the provisional development order for Kingston, St. Andrews, and the Prairie of Keys are confirmed. So it is likely that it would apply with even greater force and strength than it did apply in circumstances where the order was only provisional in nature. Also, the court determined that the development as constructed was in breach of the 2017 PDO. The development land was 0.38 acres. The 2017 PDO required at least 0.5 acre for the construction of multifamily developments. 50 habitable rooms were permitted. However, on the actual construction, 68 habitable rooms were built on a lot that was only 0.38 acres. Rooms which were described as one-bedrooms in the plans were actually units that were reckoned to be 3-bedrooms. Now, where the studio or the area of a studio exceeds 400 square feet under that relevant policy, the number of habitable rooms will be assessed as 1, 2, or 3-bedroom apartments with the numbers of rooms increasing with every 100 additional square foot under the policy that applied to that particular development. In Birdsucker, the development was 1,200 square feet. Therefore, for density purposes, the apartments, which were described as studios or one-bedrooms, were actually reckoned by virtue of the policy as being three-bedroom units. And the court found that these were breaches of the PDO relevant to that development. The court also said that the KSMC as a local authority does not have the power to vary the minimum standards under the development order. This power was vested in the Town and Country Planning Authority, and there was no evidence that the application was referred to the TCPA for its consideration or variation. The approvals were therefore ultra vires or not in compliance with the provisions of the Act. Section 12(1)A of the TCPA requires a local authority to refer the application, which are not in conformity with the development order, to that authority for its considerations of variations to be made. So the local authority did not have the jurisdictional power to grant variations of the provisions of the development order. It had to be referred to the Town and Country Planning Authority based on the scheme of the legislation. And the court went on to say that the NRCA did not have the power to grant an environmental approval after construction began and permits were granted to previous owners were personal to the owners. So the permits that were obtained by the original registered proprietor before sale to the developers were not transferable to the developers upon their acquisition of the land. They were required to get their own environmental approval and were required to do that before commencing construction work. And this was also a breach that the court found in the Birdsucker matter. So in this case, the court exercises discretion to quash the permits, even though, and the court specifically considered the fact that it would have had significant financial impact on the developer. The type of order that the court made is in order to quash the decision of a public body. That order is subject to the exercise of the court's discretion. So even where the grounds have been made out, the court can still consider whether it is fair or just to have done so. And so the court went through its analysis of the facts to say it was fair in the circumstances since the claimants, those being the neighbors, acted promptly in communicating their objections. The developer had failed to apply for their own environmental permit. The developer proceeded to build despite being aware of court action that was commenced against them. And developers intentionally misrepresented the number of habitable rooms and built more than the number that was approved of. And I want to pay some attention to the first point there, that the claimants acted promptly, because there's concern clearly among developers as well as financiers that you might have gone so far along your development, the structure is 80%, 70%, 90% complete, and then somebody might come and say, well, there are particular aspects of your approval that is vulnerable to challenge. So we just want to highlight that the court did say, or did place weight on the fact that the objectors, the neighbors, did act promptly in communicating their objection, in commencing proceedings at an early stage. They didn't sleep on their rights. And so that was a factor that impacted the exercise of the court's discretion. It is very likely that if the challenges were raised close to the end of the development or when the units were being sold, that the court would decline to exercise their discretion, one, because of delay, and also because of the potential intervention of third-party rights. That would be purchasers and their mortgage and lending entities who would have financed the ultimate purchaser's purchase of it. These people who would have been innocent in the entire process of seeking and obtaining approvals from the relevant authorities. So that's an important consideration that offers some sort of reprieve in terms of when the court will exercise this type of extraordinary jurisdiction. Now, Upper Montrose Road and 10 Roseberry Drive cases are interesting. Each concern the refusal of an application for modification and discharge of restrictive covenants which prohibit multifamily development. The court considered factors apart from the 4 primary grounds for modification and discharge in determining that it would not be just and equitable to grant the orders sought. Some of the common threads in these matters: the developers began construction before obtaining orders to modify the covenant. The construction in breach of the covenants rendered the building permits null and void. The construction exceeded the density requirements approved under the 2017 PDO, and the construction proceeded despite the developers having full knowledge of the objections and despite the court proceedings, which by that time had already commenced. So the developers were deemed to have assumed the risk associated with the litigation by them having proceeded to continue with their development. In Upper Montrose, the court had issued an interim injunction restraining further work on the property and prohibited the developer from permitting the premises to be occupied. And despite this, the developer completed the premises and let it to tenants. That was also a factor that was relevant for the court's determination in that matter. 10 Roseberry is a matter that I was involved in personally. The court observed that there were deliberate attempts to conceal the extent to which the 2017 PDO and KCMC permits were being breached by cementing off doorways and putting up blockages to prevent full access to the premises by the court on its visit to the construction site. And just to say more particularly what happened on that occasion, during the trial of the objection to the modification of restrictive covenants, the court convened for 2 days at the actual development site. So judge was in her hard hat, the developer was sworn in and walked through the development to give live evidence as to the compliance with the work that was actually being done with the terms of the provisional development orders at the time, as well as the approvals granted to it. And the court observed that the developers in that case made willful and deliberate attempts to obscure the extent to which the development that had been constructed was not being constructed in conformity with the plans. And of course, the developer, having been sworn in, everything that he was saying at that point in time was evidence, and we had the opportunity to cross-examine him based on what we were actually seeing on the ground. And the court took into consideration all of those factors. Now, these cases are interesting because Birdsucker is a case where the breach or non-compliance with the provisional development orders was litigated in a public law context. So the primary party to that litigation was the neighbors and the local authorities who granted the permit, as it is their decision that is being quashed. What's interesting in the Roseberry decision particularly is that this was a private action between the neighbor and the developer, and the court still took into consideration the fact that the provisional development orders were not being complied with. And that was one of the court's considerations in saying that even if any or all of the grounds in the act for the modification of covenants were made, the fact that the development were being pursued in an unapproved manner makes it or impacts its consideration as to whether it was just and equitable to discharge, and said on that basis it also would have refused to discharge a covenant because it wouldn't be just and equitable to permit or by implication sanction a development that had proceeded in an unlawful way. The Upper Montrose appeal is a very interesting case. In the first instance decision, the neighbors objected on the basis that they were a part of the same scheme of development and therefore are entitled to the benefit of the covenant. And that was the basis on which they tried to enforce it against that particular development. And the first instance court found that the development was in breach of the particular restrictive covenants, and also found that they were entitled to the benefit of the covenant. And interestingly, what went up on appeal was the issue of whether the neighbors were entitled to the objection that they made, not whether the covenants had been breached in the first place. So it was a question, pure question of the standing of the neighbors. The Court of Appeal considered the UK PC decision in Jamaica Mutual Life and Hillsborough that says that the court ought to identify or identification of a defined area of land to which the scheme relates and adduce evidence that the purchasers were purchased from a common vendor with the knowledge of the reciprocity of obligation under the covenants. So there are specific criteria in law for someone to claim the benefit of the covenant and then go ahead and enforce it against your development. Montrose was interesting because those questions are normally treated in a kind of pro forma way. And if you look at the first instance judgment in Montrose, you'll see that no real deep analysis or investigation was paid into whether the objectors were indeed entitled to the benefits of the covenant. And that contrasted directly with the kind of approach that was taken by the developers in the Court of Appeal. So what was decided in the Montrose decision? The objectors did not have a common vendor with the developers. So to say that you are part of the same scheme of development, you'd have to show that you derived title from a common vendor. You all purchased from the same original owner of the lot. The interesting facts of this case are that the property was registered to a Charles Costa and John Cargill upon subdivision in 1927. So at that time, Costa and Cargill owned the property jointly. Costa died in 1940, and that Hubert Dunn became the registered proprietor and joint tenant with Cargill. So change of ownership of lands in the subdivision after 1940. So from 1927 to 1940, it was Costa and Cargill. After 1927, it was Cargill and Dunn who were the registered proprietors at that point in time. The developer's original predecessor in title, meaning the persons that they purchased from, were Dunn and Cargill because the developer purchased in 1942. 3 of the 5 claimants who were objecting to the modifications of the title had purchased their property from original purchasers who obtained it from before 1940, when it was Costa and Cargill, not Dunn, who owned it. And so the court determined that there was no common vendor for the purpose of establishing the scheme of development. Therefore, they're not entitled to make the objections which they made. And in respect of the other two remaining objectors, the court said there was insufficient evidence connecting or providing evidence as a root of title to show that there are common vendors at the particular point in time. Now, this is a very interesting approach because you're looking at a subdivision that occurred nearly 100 years before this litigation. It is extremely unlikely that the kind of evidence that the court was asking for would have been preserved over that number of years and therefore be available to be adduced in evidence at court. So the effect there is that it sort of restricts or limits the applicability of the scheme of development argument for objectors, particularly when you're dealing with very, very old subdivisions of property. The court also looked at if there was a common vendor, there's no evidence that that vendor had an intention to establish a scheme. And the court said you can't just use inferential evidence. You have to adduce into evidence, direct evidence of such an intention. One example of the direct evidence that the Court of Appeal said would have been acceptable was, for example, adducing the agreement for sale. And that goes back to the point I made earlier, which is that when you're dealing with very, very old developments that are now being subdivided for the purpose of multifamily developments, it is extremely unlikely that you'll be able to find that kind of evidence, for example, correspondence, agreements for sale, to show and prove that there was a common intention for the benefits to be enjoyed by all. Court also noted that if there is no evidence of the knowledge of the intention of the purchasers, and if there was a finding of a common vendor who had an intention to create reciprocal obligations, once the original vendors had notice of this at the time of purchase, one may infer an intention on the part of the purchasers to take the land on the same premise. This not being the case, there was no basis to infer that the purchasers had an intention to assume an obligation to anyone but their vendor. So the question there surrounded whether these covenants were to inure to the benefit of all persons who were buying lots subdivided from the main lot or the larger plot, or was it only for the benefit of the original owner who was subdividing it? And that directly impacts the ability of those neighbors to enforce the covenants. And we would argue, or would say that this judgment imposed a higher standard or higher evidentiary standard for the benefit of the covenants. Now, we are coming close to the end of the time of this presentation, so I just want to highlight that in respect of restrictive covenants, as well as provisional development orders and developments in the litigation surrounding these issues, it calls for a heightened sense of due diligence in the process of undertaking developments, doing thorough root of title analysis to see who are the beneficiaries of your covenants, who are likely to object. In most of the matters I deal with contentious restrictive covenants cases, oftentimes negotiations with the neighbors can yield to some fruit. The neighbors would say, well, if you build a high-rise there, you might be impacting my privacy rights. So can we negotiate as to what the actual shape or form of your development would take? Increasingly, what we're finding in our practice as well is that financiers are asking for opinions concerning the reliability of the planning approvals that have been obtained, because any legal risk or vulnerability with respect to the approvals obtained also amount to financial risk for the financiers as well. So that has impacted how the landscape has changed. These sorts of enhanced due diligence exercises, procuring legal opinions and being cautious in the process of financing developments are some of the impacts that we're seeing arising from the recent spate of litigation. I think we've come up to the end of the time allotted for this presentation. I'd love to stick around to answer any questions in the Q&A section that would follow. I'll turn over to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for that very interesting presentation. We are running a little bit late, so we have to move on. And therefore, I would ask that we take the commercial break now and come back shortly with the question and answer.
So many depend on you. Why not protect them? Protect your family's future. Take the fear out of being unprepared with JN Life Family Aid, a family critical illness policy from JN Life Insurance.
For over 40 years, the JDA Group of companies have been developing plans, laying foundations, building hundreds of homes of distinction, creating exclusive and secure communities in which we live, play, and raise families. The JDA Group of companies, creating homes that people enjoy.
Solutions. Support. Service. Smart AI features. DigiView Security Limited. Human detection, line crossing, license plate recognition, 180-degree camera view, 360-degree camera view, multiple angle view, face recognition.
Embrace the future. Build cleaner. Build greener. Build with Carib Cement.
Thank you very much. We're back again, and it's time for the questions and answers in the panelists. I take the opportunity to remind you to pose your questions in the Q&A and not in the chat. I see one or two questions coming through the chat, but pose them in the Q&A, and I would ask the panelists, because I'm sure we're not going to have enough time to answer all of the questions, but I would ask the panelists to check the Q&A and where possible to type responses to those questions which have not been answered. All right, we have three panelists. We have Mr. Alton Morgan, who is well known to everybody, over 44 years experience in real estate practice as an attorney at law. He's an associate member of the Jamaica Developers Association for over 20 years and has served on the National Land Agency Advisory Board, the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce Legislation and Regulations Committee, the Land Divestment Board. He has also been the legal advisor to the Jamaica Developers Association and attorney for several of the long-standing premium property developers, which are JDA members. We also have Mr. Andre Gordon, who is the chairman of the Education Committee. He's a land surveyor, commissioned land surveyor. He's chairman of the Education Committee of the Land Surveyors Association of Jamaica. We also have another attorney, Mrs. Leisha Ann Smith, partner with Eunice Schofield, Dillian and Company. She's in the Conveyancing and Probate Practice Department of her firm, where she has represented clients in diverse property transactions since 2003. She handles transactions for a major residential developer and is the firm's representative with the Jamaica Developers Association and the PSOJ. With that type of expert in real estate sales, she resolves complex issues, manages land-related matters, and represents clients in court on restrictive covenant modifications. She also guides clients in estate planning, securing probate, and addressing estate administration, including applications under the Mental Health Act. So I've opened the floor. Welcome, panelists. Who wants to take the first question? Or who wants to ask the first question of Matthew?
Okay, well, if I may,
certainly, Alton.
Yes, three small but important points for Matthew. That the plethora of strata developments we now see are occurring because they're able to circumvent the typical restriction on subdivision that you would find on a title. And that is because of a special provision in the Strata Titles Act, Section 3, subsection 5, which excludes the operation of any statute relating to subdivision of land. The other point, interestingly, is that within a strata corporation itself, the covenants can be modified by the strata owners using the statutory provisions of sections 9 to 12 of the Strata Titles Act and Regulation 11. That's important because what we're seeing now is that persons want to conduct Airbnb activity, which is non-residential, it's business activity. And we're seeing applications being made to the court to have covenants for strata which limit use to residential purposes change to permit Airbnb. So that's another area of development in the use of property which is occurring. And the third point I would make is that developers need to be very cautious in choosing the attorneys who are going to make these restrictive covenant modification applications for them. It's a highly technical and very sophisticated area of practice. It's not for the inexperienced or uninitiated. And regrettably, when colleagues in the profession who are not sufficiently versed engage in representing developers, it often leads to decisions which are inimical to the best interests of developers. So that's essentially what I would want to raise as subjects for discussion as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, Alton. That's perfectly right. You hit the nail on the head. Just one little thing. Am I correct in saying that the most recent, the current Building Act provides for approval by what used to be the parish council, the municipal corporations, but they must be subject to the modification of the covenant to accommodate the development or the subdivision.
Oh, yes. It's always clearly stated
quite
in the
clear
building approvals. Yes.
Yeah. So that has blocked a little bit of a problem that we used to have, and I think it's important to recognize that.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Matthew.
I certainly agree, and I want to underscore a point that Alton made about the highly technical nature of these types of applications and the impact that errors from a due diligence standpoint before you file your papers in court, investigating the title thoroughly, ensuring that the grounds that you are applying under are well made out, putting in place your supporting evidence from real estate agents where it is likely that you are going to face objection from neighbors to ensure that you have a good or high prospect of succeeding if the application becomes contentious. All of these things are important. And I think the litigation shows that it's a counsel of prudence to put a lot of effort in the front end. Don't just treat the application as a pro forma exercise. You go before the master 2 or 3 times and it's granted. There's a lot of effort that is required from prudent legal counsel from the jump to ensure that 6 months down the line, a year down the line, you're not being, your development is not being challenged.
One of the things we have also found is that, as from the surveying aspect of it, is that enough consultation is not being done with the land surveyor to determine, for example, distance covenants and some other modifications that are necessary. And that issue only arises at the back end when the units are to be sold and mortgages are to be obtained, and there are several breaches of the covenants. And then we're being asked to explain when we weren't considered at the front end. So I'd urge developers and attorneys that it is very important that you consult with the land surveyor at the very beginning of the project, because we can offer a whole lot of oversight and information on the modification of the covenants.
And I would like to add, thanks, Matthew, great presentation. And I think what it does show is that everything is interlinked. You can't look at development orders alone and then look at restrictive covenants separately. You have to look at them in conjunction because they interplay, and the role of the local authority may change depending on which aspect you're coming from. But at the end of the day, for a developer, you want to ensure that you're going to be able to continue your project. So it is important, as Andre said, consult with the professionals. You have architects, you have commissioned land surveyors, you have quantity surveyors, and of course you have the attorneys. So it's very important that even before embarking on your project, that you do consult with the professionals to find out what it is that may prevent you from being able to achieve the goal that you have. And with the Building Act, especially the new requirements, or I'll say newer requirements, to consult with your neighbors, even if they may not be entitled to the benefit of a restrictive covenant, they may be entitled to some other protection based on other provisions in law.
Good. Just one more thing to toss into the basket. The problem with modification of covenants, one of the big problems, is the time it takes in the courts. And it's taking longer and longer and longer. And this holds up the whole development process and it's very difficult to project your costs when you don't know when this thing is going to end. And that's one of the problems. And the other problem is, I think, coming from the local authorities, where if you even have a simple distance covenant that's been in effect for 40, 50 years, before you can even make an application that is of any substance to modify it, I mean, maybe 2, 3 feet, maybe, I mean, everybody else can, or you have to produce a copy of the original building approval, or you have to get approval all over. I mean, so, you know, it causes problems. These are the roadblocks that I think that people are running away from, and gives them the incentive to try and circumvent various things.
There's a little comment I'd like to raise. I'm discovering through representing several clients whose frontages are being acquired in the road expansion program, that the covenants which speak to the setback distance from the roadway will automatically be compromised. And Andre, you can speak to this as well. Because when the road is widened and the covenant speaks to the building being a specific distance from the road boundary, once the road is widened, you instantly create a breach of covenant. And in dealing with the commission of lands on it, we are experiencing difficulty in coming to an understanding that the exercise of statutory powers to widen the road should not impose a technical breach upon the landowner whose land has been taken away to facilitate the road widening. Andre, I don't know if you can speak to this whole business of measuring from the road boundary vis-a-vis from the center line of the road.
It's one way to look at it, but we have to look at the original intention of the covenant, which was to prevent, because one of the reasons you would have been asked to build a certain distance away from the road boundary is to prevent the destruction of your building in the case of the expansion of the roadway. But once that has been done, then the covenant then would have served its purpose. And now there would need to be a modification of the covenant. So I think that from that legal perspective, then you would have some grounds for the covenant to be modified because it no longer applies, because there has been an expansion of the roadway. So circumstances would have now prevented this covenant from applying to your particular lot or particular title. So I would look at it from that perspective, and to present a case to, I know this comes up all in mortgage situations, and the bank quite possibly does not want to hear that. They are interested in ticking a box and say, no, there is a breach of covenant. No, which is when we pass it on to the professionals, the legal professionals, to make a case for that not to be the for a mortgage or for modification of the covenant.
But is the land surveyor able to add a note to his ID report to say that the proximity of the building to the roadway has occurred because of the widening of the road? Or is it that when the ID report is written, it's just what you see is what you get?
In some cases, what if asked, and I think it would have been the purview of the individual surveyor if he can state circumstances, extenuating circumstances why there might have been a breach of covenant. So in that case, the surveyor can make that remark to say there's a breach of restrictive covenants, such and such, but this is due to the widening of Hagley Park Road, for example. And,
Yes.
and that, I think that would advance, but it does not change the fact that the covenant need to be modified.
Yes. Okay.
Because it would run with the land, I presume.
And of course, that modification is required all the way down the road because most
All
of
the
these
way
people have
down
the
the
same
road.
covenant, and it
Yes.
causes problems and more expenses and so on. Yes.
Right.
Right, and rather than each individual having to deal with it, I think there should be a policy decision. Because if
Absolutely.
the road is being widened, it is something that the surveyor who is preparing, for example, the project plan or whatever the case is in relation to that road expansion should take into consideration. The fact
Yes,
that the
sure.
setbacks will now change, and as a result, all these properties will be affected. And it is something that we do have to look at holistically.
Yeah,
I don't think the surveyor would be minded to take that into consideration. The surveyor would be required to produce a pre-check plan. It is at a policy level, probably, I guess, much higher than the surveyor. Whoever that project is related to, maybe the NWA or the legal entities affected by whose responsibility it would have been to do that. But I wouldn't lay that squarely at the feet of the surveyor, but more as a policy decision going forward.
Agreed.
Agreed. Maybe we're going to take one or two of the questions now appearing on the Q&A board. Matthew Alton, what happens if you bought and want to develop a property based on the commercial zoning outlined in the development order, but the neighbors object to your efforts to modify the restrictive covenant on the title? Conflict between a residential covenant versus a zoning problem.
Well, I'll tackle that one because I recently did an appeal which fell into that basket. The zoning essentially prescribes the change in the character of the neighborhood. And that is the basis on which one would make the application. But it's interesting that in order to make the application properly to the court, you have to seek change of use approval from the planning authority. And they go through a process of consultation with the neighborhood, etc., before they make a decision. The matter I had followed that process, and then the decision was handed down to refuse the change. And an appeal was raised. Well, we're waiting on the outcome of that appeal. But it can be an extremely difficult and tedious process to get to the point where you have the statutory change of use approval that would support your application to the court for the covenant against non-residential use to be lifted.
You just answered a question from Sean Castle, which is directed in that. In that man, I think. We have another question directed at Alton again. Alton mentioned the drive to include Airbnb activities as commercial, but how does that differ from rentals? Some homeowners rent on a short-term basis, 6 months, 12 months, etc.
Well, Matthew, correct me if I'm wrong. The Privy Council decision, I think it's a case out of Turks and Caicos, am I right? Or the Cayman Islands, interpreted a restrictive covenant that says residential to mean continuing use and occupation, such as that one would receive mail there and so forth. So that short-term rental is essentially not regarded as residential use. And that would breach the covenant which prescribes residential use of the strata unit.
And you can also make a direct principal assessment of it. When you have a lease, you're getting an interest in the land itself. It's a proprietary type of relationship. The Airbnb person is entirely contractual, it's entirely commercial. They don't have an interest in the land itself by virtue of that. So there are some clear distinctions that you can make between both types of arrangements.
Yes. Oh, yes, the Airbnb user is a licensee.
Precisely. A contract licensee. It doesn't get an interest in the land itself. as opposed to a person who takes out a lease for a certain duration.
So Matthew, am I to understand that if I'm doing a surveyor's report for a property in a apartment complex, and there's clear evidence, I mean, we usually don't necessarily go inside, that then we should report it as a breach of covenant if we know that it is being used as a Airbnb?
I think
because one of the covenants usually state that this property should be used for residential purposes only. And one would assume that once you're in an apartment complex, it is for residential use.
But Andre, that goes back to a point that Alton had made earlier, that the Strata Corporation itself has a right to modify those covenants.
Yes.
So maybe you're talking about getting a copy of the rules of the Strata Corporation, just to make sure that in addition to the restrictive covenants on a title, there may be other considerations when you look at the regulation, at the rules.
Yeah, but those modifications would have been in an extra B or C.
Yes.
But so they would be in the title. So, but it is we should be careful to note that we're going forward. But as I said, when we do a lot of the surveyors reports, we don't have the time or the ability to make the distinction between whether this property is being used for somebody living there or as an Airbnb. And we might be, and once the bank finds that out or somebody finds that out, somebody usually points to the survey and, okay, survey produced a clean report. So I guess that's some of the questions that we have to ask of the client going forward.
Question to the entire panel: are there foreseeable challenges or opportunities in Jamaica's evolving legal landscape that might impact the modification of restrictive covenants in the near future?
Matthew, you're younger than I am. You can see more to the future.
Nothing particularly comes to mind. I think what the litigation that we've seen underscores, and what we've heard from both other attorneys on this panel, is that put a lot of effort in the front end of your development. And I think Lisan's point about coordinating with all the professionals that are involved in your development process, the surveyor, your attorney, your architect, your engineer, that is your best backstop against future risk. They can do the type of due diligence exercises that are necessary, can advise you. And though their advice might result in you taking a little longer to get your ground broken or the development to be complete, it can be a protection against a lot of risk that can come in the long run. So before 2020 births, if I was happy to tell you that, or probably nobody could have foreseen that provisional development orders would have impacted a developer's development. But the type of due diligence that we're speaking about and putting the effort in the front end is your best backstop against those kinds of future risks.
There are two questions posed by anonymous attendee. The first one, I mean, who bears the cost of modification? Is it fair to land owner to bear the cost? Yes, unfortunately, the landowner bears the cost, but going to court if there may be an award for him to get costs in the light of the facts pertaining to the application. But the other question he has asked is to Leisha Ann. What remedies are available to an adjoining owner who may not be entitled to the benefit of a particular covenant because their title came from a different subdivision plan, but nevertheless is still affected by the proposed modification of the covenant? For example, a covenant that restricts the use of the land to residential purposes only.
Well, one of the bases on which someone can object to the modification of a covenant is that they're entitled to the benefit. So usually if you're not entitled to the benefit, unfortunately, you cannot use that procedure. But there may be other rules, regulations, or laws which allow you to make an application. So for example, if it is clear that the covenant says the property is to be used for residential purposes only, and you have knowledge that it is not being used for residential purposes, you can bring that information to the attention of the authorities. It may very well be a breach of some other prescription, and the authority may be the one to bring the action, or it could be that if some permission were granted for the change in use, that a judicial review could be sought of the decision to grant the application. So in many instances, it will depend on exactly what is happening, what evidence there is of it, and if there are any statutory provisions that can allow for some interested person, so not necessarily someone who is entitled to the benefit, but an affected party or an interested person to bring the application.
Yeah. There's a clarification. The question relating to landowner bearing costs was being asked in the case of compulsory acquisition, which results in the breach. And that is why I think that the panel was suggesting that there ought to be some holistic approach to this to prevent that type of problem from occurring and burdening a landowner with the costs of having to rectify a covenant on his title, which obviously
if I can elucidate further, Afif, one of the solutions being examined with the Commission of Lands is the application of the Main Roads Act and the Parochial Roads Act, because setback distances from roadways are prescribed by statute based on the type of roadway. And within each statute, there is provision for the technical director of works to give approval for the reduction of the distance. Now, the problem is the disconnect between the Commission of Lands and the National Works Agency or the local authority, and how do you get that waiver endorsed upon the title, so that when Andre or his colleagues go to look at it, they won't be reporting a breach of covenant. So we're trying to work out a documentary solution that would alleviate the problem. If not, then when the compulsory acquisition takes place, the agreement should stipulate that if it becomes necessary for the covenant to be modified, that the government, the acquirer, should pay that cost.
But that's part of the holistic approach, and it's going to take a little while to get to that, you know. Doris Gross, shouldn't there be a difference in the zoning classification between a short-term tourism rental and a commercial rental? Rentals are not exactly the same as commercial activities such as offices or retail. Interesting. Interesting.
Yes.
Well, what I would say is that it will actually depend on what the covenant says. So a covenant restricting usage to only residential purposes, it means that even if it's not commercial, if it is the short-term rental, which is not necessarily residential, then it would still be a breach. So it may very well
back to the point Alton had made earlier, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Any other questions? There are no other questions coming from the Q&A that we haven't really addressed. Any other questions from the panelists to Matthew?
Oh, Matthew, are you aware of the decision in Ministry of Housing versus Raynor, where it's an interesting case? I think it's from 2017, where an application was made in the Cherry Gardens area to modify covenant for development. The site was actually the former home of a high court judge, owned by the government, and then they sold it to the Ministry of Housing. And the neighbors objected simply by filing a notice of objection, but no affidavit in support. And even so, the court relied upon their objection and said they were satisfied that there had been no change in the character of the neighborhood. So it means that objecting does not necessarily require the objector to go all the way through the court process. They can simply file their notice of objection and sit back to see what happens.
And have the court evaluate it on the basis of, treating what is set out in the objection in assessing the statutory criteria. That's an approach. I've never had a client who that wants to take that kind of passive approach. But yeah, I think it's a material innovation in litigation. Yeah.
Well, the court has now endorsed it as one way in which you can challenge the modification application.
Yeah. Very interesting indeed.
Yes.
Yeah, very interesting.
Thank you very much, panelists. Thank you very much, Matthew. It has been a very interesting discussion, and I'm sure that it is relevant to all of us. So all of us have seen these little problems crop up, and we hope that the law will develop in a way that will protect, especially those who are affected by road widening procedures. Thank you all very much. It's been a very, very lively and entertaining Q&A session. And I would now move that we go to the next item, which is integrating water harvesting in new and old developments. Thank you all very much again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
All right. The next topic, the final topic for our webinar today is the question of integrating water harvesting in new and old developments. And the panelist is Mr. Robert Stevens. We'll go to the break after I've introduced Mr. Stevens. I know it's the other way around normally. But Mr. Robert Stevens is well known to everybody, president of the Pragma Consultants Limited. He's the president of Pragma, a Jamaican management consulting firm focusing on sustainable project development. He has over 50 years of senior management, project development, and consulting experience in Jamaica, Jordan, Ghana, Nigeria, and the Caribbean. In 2021, he developed and presented a rainwater harvesting course on behalf of JN Foundation and presented to various persons in development and financing major projects, as well as taught courses to those interested in becoming designers and installers of RWH systems. He's currently the chairperson of the Jamaica Protected Areas Trust and a director of Jamaica Conservation Development Trust, the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica, Port Royal Development Company, Decor and Dash Limited, and Triple Development Company Limited. Bobby, as is well known, has been the co-chairman of the Advocates Network, Deputy General Manager of Subsidiary Management and Revenue Generation at the UDC, a Senior Vice President of the Port Authority of Jamaica, World Bank Tourism Consultant in Jordan, Director of Tourism for Jamaica, World Bank Consultant on Housing Development in Ghana and Nigeria, General Manager of Clarendon Alumina Production Limited, Director of Projects at the National Housing Trust, and Project Investment Analysis at National Investment Bank of Jamaica, and a civil engineer at the National Water Authority. That is a well-rounded resume, Mr. Stevens. And I know, ask you to take the podium, as it were, and address us on integrating water harvesting in new and old development. Over to you, sir.
Well, this presentation is about rainwater and greywater harvesting systems, and it's a condensed version of what we really want to present, but I'll go through it as quickly as possible. All right, first of all, freshwater stress is taking place worldwide. And in particular, when you look across North America, as well as the European states and parts of North Africa, you have the major problems in terms of water supply. Water, the largest sphere on this diagram is the water in the world. That is in the oceans and everything. The smallest sphere that is pointed to there is the water that is accessible to humans, and that is from both groundwater as well as from rainwater. What you're finding is that many of the oceans occupy the majority of the water, which is saline. But when it comes to fresh water, you really are looking at some of the lakes, the ice and snow melting, but the amount that is coming from surface water and groundwater, etc., is limited. Climate change is affecting water supplies worldwide. Water is becoming a lot more in demand, but is getting scarce. Frequent water restrictions, even in Kingston, you have lockoffs and you have it becoming a norm rather than an exception. The demand for water conservation, including rainwater harvesting, is rapidly increasing. And we're finding this in particular with new developments. Rainwater harvesting is collecting the runoff from a structure or other impervious surface in order to store it for later use. And rain from the roof will collect in gutters and be channeled that you can utilize later on through a system that will allow you to store it and then distribute it. Rainwater harvesting systems can be as simple as collecting rain in a barrel or as elaborate as harvesting rainwater into large tanks to supply hotels or a housing complex. They can be configured to supply all of your house or just your landscape needs. And it's extremely good for landscape. Rainwater is relatively clean and absolutely free of sodium and things like that. You have total control over your water supply. It's socially acceptable and environmentally responsible, promotes self-sufficiency and helps conserve water. Rainwater is better for landscape plants and gardens because it's not chlorinated, reduces stormwater runoff and drainage problems. This is particularly important in Kingston, where we are seeing that the slightest rain that occurs nowadays, you have flooding all over the place. Simple, inexpensive, and easy to maintain. It can be a main source of water or a backup source, and is flexible, modular, and can be fitted to an existing structure or built during new home construction or new development. Some other benefits. Its end use is usually close to the source, so you eliminate the need for complex and costly distribution systems. Rainwater provides a water source when groundwater is unacceptable or unavailable. Zero hardness of rainwater helps prevent scale in appliances and extends their use. Rainwater harvesting eliminates the need for a water softener. The salt and salts added during the softening process. Rainwater is sodium-free, important for persons on low sodium diets. And rainwater is superior for landscape irrigation, as I've noted before. Rainwater harvesting reduces your utility bills. Very important when you consider that we're paying 40 US cents per kilowatt hour for our electricity in Jamaica. Now, what has happened in terms of the progression of water conservation standards? In particular, you notice that things like a clothes washer used to use a significant amount of water for its cycles. Now we have reduced that to about 10 gallons per wash. What has happened also is that dishwashers have been reduced significantly. So it suits you to use modern dishwashers, modern clothes washing machines. And thirdly, when it comes to your toilets, you find that we're now down to 1.2. So in some cases, I've heard of even 0.8 gallons per flush. So they're becoming far more efficient in terms of use. Water is becoming a scarce commodity, therefore. And what we need to do is conserve and ensure that that is done when we are designing our buildings and our developments. Water efficiency in hotels, homes can be improved. Water for showers, toilets, dishwashers, etc. can be further reduced, but we don't expect it to go down much more. We don't have much room to go in terms of achieving more efficiency gains with our indoor fixtures. Where we can make a big difference is with rainwater harvesting and grey water recycling. And these will have the greatest impact on water conservation. Now, when you look at the water cycle, water to a large extent comes from evaporation of the sea and things like that. And then it goes around through the atmosphere, comes down as rain, and then goes into the water surface as well as the groundwater surface. So those are the areas. Now, if you capture it with rainwater harvesting, you're capturing it at a very good point. This just shows the effects of what is happening with respect to change in the whole landscape of water. You're finding the water table going down when you overpump in some areas. In some areas, there's a cone of depression that just barely makes it to the water table. In other areas, you have dry wells. And then in some areas, you have a well that used to give you good water, but is now bringing salt water to the surface because of saltwater intrusion. So these are all impacts of overpumping of groundwater and groundwater depletion. Grid supplied water is generally available year-round, is cheap in the short term. Long-term reliance is uncertain in some areas, and recent and likely future disruptions. We already have disruptions taking place on a regular basis. Rainwater harvesting can replace or complement grid supply, requires careful installation and treatment, must ensure safeguards from a portable perspective. Grey water is available on site, expensive first cost, but usually has a decent payback and serves to buffer combined sewer overflows. When you look at various standards worldwide, rainwater is water from natural precipitation that has not been contaminated by use. Stormwater is any rain that touches the ground and flows across the surface of the ground, whether it's a roadway or parking surface, gully creeks, etc. Also termed surface water. At Monroe College, we use a lot of surface water, but the water is used for bathing and for purposes of flushing toilets, etc. And there are several different interpretations if you go to the various international standards of what rainwater and stormwater are and what a stormwater catchment system is. All right, rainwater harvesting simplest systems are dry systems. In other words, they're non-pressurized. And these include rain barrels where the pipes run from the rain gutters into a tank. Those are usually short-term, and you use them to a large extent for watering the garden and things like that. Dry systems do not hold any water in the pipes after it stops raining, and they do not create breeding grounds for mosquitoes and other insects. Wet systems are necessary when the pipes cannot be configured to run directly into the tanks and are usually pressurized so that the long runs of pipes do not retain stagnant water. These systems are more sophisticated as a result. Now, understanding some of the critical things. First of all, you have to know your volume and quality of rainwater you need. Secondly, you have to understand the environment. Is there a lot of vegetation? For instance, you have to clear trees that are over the roof area that you're going to use to collect the water. Otherwise, you get leaves contaminating and fine particles. You'll also have, of course, insects and other hidden activity. And there's seasonality to that as well. Apply the 8 rainwater harvesting steps. Limit the sources of contamination. Plan for the volumes. You know, you'll have a day when you have heavy rain, and then you have a month where you have no more rain. Well, you have to plan for storing that volume of water on the rainy days. But clearly, you can't provide for all of it. Some of it will overflow. Filter the leaves and debris. Divert the first flush. That first flush that comes out of the rainwater coming off of the roof sometimes has particles that you want to get rid of. So we use what is called a first flush diverter, and I'll explain all about that shortly. Secure the system, ensure that it is something that is properly managed, and manage your standing water. Consider a safety net and monitor and maintain the system. You can't just leave the system after you set it up. You have to look at it. Some things have to be cleaned every week, some things every month, some things once a year. Your tanks, for instance, you clean out once a year. You have to design your system based on pillars 1, 2, and 3, and you'll have the right system. Okay, what are the key components of a rainwater harvesting system? First of all, you have the catchment surface. Then you have the gutters and the downspouts. You have leaf screens. You have first flush diverters and roof washers to ensure that the leaves and the various other debris don't get into your tank. You have the storage tanks. Then you have your system design, construction, and capacity. And the water balance and sizing is critical. And the quality and treatment of the water, I'm going to cover as well. All right, here is a typical system. You have a roof, which is number 1. Number 2, it flows into a downspout. And then you have 3, your first flush diverter. Your first flush diverter is here. Then you go to your tank, which is your storage tank. Then you have an overflow. If the tank gets too full, you want to take the overflow out into the garden or somewhere. Number 6 is what you have is controls. And these controls are either electrical or manual or whatever. But the point is that you have to have controls over the system. Number 7 is where you have your pumps, and you're pumping now up into the house or up into, especially when you have 2-story and 3-story buildings, you collect your water on the ground floor, but you have to pump it up. Number 8 is your 8 is pump. Treatment system is 7, and 8 is pump. 9 now is where you have a backflow prevention. You ensure that water going into the system from the rainwater is not getting mixed up with the water from outside. In other words, if you are using both the grid system and a rainwater harvesting system, you have to have a backflow prevention valve, which is essentially a check valve. Number 10 is where, number 10 is your flow meter. You want to check the flow to ensure that you know how much water you're sending into your house. 11 is your power supply, which controls the whole system. Number 12 is your water level indicator. You want to be able to go outside and look at the water levels in your tank to determine how you're going to manage that water. You know, sometimes you may decide, listen, you don't have enough water for washing today, the clothes, and you're going into a drought period. So you may decide to just put off the washing of the clothes until hopefully you get some rain to fill back the tank. All right, the next point. Here's another diagram showing the system, the catchment service, the gutters, the downspouts, the first flush diverter, the tanks, etc. And I'm just giving you some examples. Here's another one which is similar. You see all the components are there as well. Again, similar situation where you have the tank and you have the gutters and the first flush diverter. Now, 1 inch of rainfall on a 2,000 square foot roof equals 1,250 gallons of water. 30 inches of annual rainfall generates about 41,000 gallons of reusable water. If you think of a 10,000 square foot lot, that uses about 3,000 gallons per week just to keep the plants going, etc. So it's very important that you have to be careful about running sprinklers too long. And 70% of water used at home is used outdoors mainly. So you have to be careful about how you manage the water use in your house. Now, the kind of surface that you use for catching water can be any flat surface, and it slope it a little bit so that it goes into your catchment area, whether the gutters, etc. And this is mainly roofs because it's a large surface. It could be a chicken coop, it could be a barn, it could be a parking area roof. You can be creative in that area. Surface materials vary, and you have to be careful of contaminants. Now, there are several things that can be done here. Composite shingle is usually good for garden use and all that, but you have to be careful. Built-up flat roof is usually pretty good, but not usually for potable water due to the tar and other contaminants. Corrugated asphalt panel, usually good for all uses except potable water. Tile roof, very good, every water use except if toxic material is embedded. Some tile roofs have chemicals that are embedded in the tiles, and you therefore have to be careful about using that, particularly for potable water purposes. Corrugated metal is usually good for all uses, including potable water. Polycarbonate or vinyl, multiple uses, including potable. Wood shingle is good for gardens and landscaping, as wood can have chemicals embedded for treatment. Most wooden roofs or shingle roofs have chemicals to preserve the shingles. So you have to be careful about using that for potable use. Concrete catchment is often used for community water supply, but it can also be used in all these high-rise concrete buildings where you use the roof water from the concrete and put it into your channels and then save it on the ground floor, for instance, and you can pump it back into the whole development. Water quality and function is a function of the type of roof material, climatic conditions, and the surrounding environment. I've given a lot of references where you can, if this is shared afterwards, people can go to those references and look them up. Okay, this is a typical installation of the gutters and the downspouts, and that you will see is very simple. And by the way, most hardware stores are now selling this. The leaf filter prevents the gutters from blocking and eliminates a fire hazard, makes rainwater catchment more efficient, and a filter is usually mounted directly under the roof gutter. First flush diverters take out the leaves and debris and fecal matter, and the cleaner water goes to your system, goes into the tank. So first flush diverters are typically requiring no power, so they are low cost, low tech way to improve the water quality. Again, I've given references. This is how the principle works. You have like a float, and here it is full over here, and then the water flows into the tank once the chamber is full. But the first flush goes in here and goes below your ball, and then when the ball reaches the top, it allows it to go into the tank. The roof washer, placed just ahead of the storage tank, usually consists of a tank with leaf strainers and a filter. A commercially available model has a series of baffles and a 30-micron filter. Pot filters are the simplest rainwater pre-filters, and these are often used in many of our rainwater harvesting systems. All right, so all rainwater tank designs should include a solid, secure cover, a coarse inlet filter, an overflow pipe, a manhole, sump, or drain to facilitate cleaning, an extraction system that does not contaminate the water, example, a tap or a pump, a soakaway to provide spill water from forming puddles near the tank. You don't want puddles to be able to breed mosquitoes and things like that. That's very important. Additional features might include a device to indicate the amount of water in the tank, a sediment trap, tipping bucket or foul flush mechanism, a lock on the top, a second subsurface tank to provide water for livestock, etc. Above ground polyethylene tanks look like this, and you notice the overflow on each of them. Here is a galvanized metal tank that is often used in schemes as well as in developments or individual homes. Here is underground polyethylene tanks, again used in schemes mainly. Here you have a major concrete tank underground. In many of the houses, for instance, in Mandeville, etc., you'll find that the houses have the bottom floor which might be a basement like, is fully a concrete water tank. And they use pumps to get it throughout the house. Water quality is determined by the composition of water as affected by natural processes and human activities. Water quality depends on constituents dissolved or contained within the water. Pure rainwater is not possible due to dissolved gases, dust, salt, etc. 3 types of contamination can be distinguished. Microbiological contamination, especially from enteric pathogens, etc. The chemical contamination from air pollution, industrial and traffic emissions, etc. And physical contamination, which will include leaves and things like that, or organic settlements on the roof. So you have to be careful of those. Rainwater can also pose a health risk due to mosquitoes or in or near the rainwater harvesting systems. Rainwater harvesting containers need secure covers or screens to avoid mosquitoes. Rainwater can absorb gases such as carbon dioxide, oxygen, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide. So you have to be careful about the amount that is captured in it. It can also capture soot and other microscopic particulates and debris, and bird and animal droppings. Chemical contaminants can usually be introduced mainly through the collection system, and in particular from the roof, as pointed out earlier. Volatile organic chemicals include plastics, glues, and solvents, as well as gasolines, greases, and oils, which may have spilled in the area where you're collecting, etc. So you have to be very careful about these types of contaminants. There's a water quality standard for Jamaica, which has been put out by the Water Commission, and these are the types of things that are allowable. The ranges for each of the types of, whether it's calcium, chloride, magnesium, etc., for rainwater, for drinking water standards. The Water Commission monitors potable water island-wide and thus checks for various contaminants, whether it be nitrates, calcium, coliforms, etc. Now, filtration is designed to remove waterborne protozoa and bacteria, but not viruses. Purification is designed to combat all 3 classes of microbes, including viruses. Potable water systems require treatment beyond the leaf screen and roof washer to remove sediment and disease-causing pathogens from stored water. Treatment generally consists of filtration and disinfection processes before distribution to ensure health and safety. Filtration and ultraviolet disinfection is popular, with 2 inline sediment filters, and of course, the charcoal filter can be followed by ultraviolet light. Ozone is also used, and that is not as popular in Jamaica as chlorination. Chlorination is the most used type of, shall we say, it kills bacteria, and the content time is critical to between 2 and 5 minutes and is used in most of the water supplies in Jamaica. There are various methods of treatment. You have the screening, you have the gutters and the downspouts being screened, settling, sedimentation, etc. within the tank before the tap, and filtering. But you also have now the treatment techniques, which might be microbiological, boiling or chemical treatment with chlorine or iodine, ultraviolet light, ozonation, nanofiltration, and reverse osmosis. I won't go into the details of each of those, but the fact is that I've given you a whole lot of references that you can look up later. Now, maintaining your rainwater harvesting system. Gutters usually you have to check regularly, and some people check them weekly, others check them monthly for rusting or leaks, or you may use sandpaper to get off the aluminum, glass, and paint or fix and the rusting areas. Make sure the gutters are secured. You have to clean the gutter screens monthly. The first flush is usually after every rainstorm. You flush out what is in there so that when the next rain comes, you have an empty first flush provider. Gravel pits are used monthly. You check them again. And the tank annually you have to get into the tank, clean it out properly, drain it, and ensure that there are no things that are caught up in the bottom that may be hidden from you usually. So it's very important to clean your tanks on an annual basis. In Jamaica, there are no national standards, but we do have in Manchester and St. Elizabeth, rainwater harvesting is recommended by the parish council or the municipal council. In other areas such as Kingston, the regularity of water lockoff suggests it should be required. The voluntary approach has been the hallmark of water conservation efforts and water conservation in Jamaica. Best management practices guide has been developed in some states in the US, such as Texas, and in particular, the American Rainwater Catchment Systems Association is a very good source of information, and I put the link to their website. Gray water is water that comes out of, for instance, your washing machine, your shower, your kitchen sink. Storage and pumping systems are limited, and indoor gray water use is something that is used for plants mainly. But some of them are very simple. You can take all the wastewater generated and put it into your gardens. A good source is, of course, the sinks, the showers, the baths, the clothes washing machines, or dishwashers. Grey water does contain contaminants, so that is why it usually is not treated for things like use for drinking purposes, but is used for, you know, putting outside in the gardens and so on. I won't spend too much time on this because the fact is, let me just give you a typical easy source of, from your washing machine. Usually people just connect it into the garden, so it flows from the washing machine straight in. I have that at my house and it's very useful. You get some fabulous plants from it. Showers is the same thing. You can take the water from the shower and put directly into the gardens. Kitchen sinks as well, but sometimes you have to be careful. You may have to put in, to avoid clogging, you have to put in some sort of filter that is going to be cleaned on a regular basis. These are some of the systems. In some cases, they store the water and treat it, but as far as Jamaica goes, most people just use it for their gardens. In some places in New Zealand, etc., they use the grey water and treat it and reuse it. All right, that's it. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't take too long for that presentation. I think it was about 25 minutes.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you. You certainly stuck within your allotted time. Thanks very much. That really helps us a bit. All right. Very interesting presentation. We go now to our final commercial break before we press on with the question and answer part of our project.
This is Mark. He's saving to make sure that this one doesn't have to worry about student loans. This is Tevin. He's saving to make sure that next year he can live by his own rules. And this is Janelle. She's saving to make sure that the girls' trip to Greece makes it out of the group chat. They all have one thing in common. They're JN Bank savings. Saving little by little is what makes life affordable. Stop wishing you could. With your JN Bank savings, you absolutely can. JN Bank, we'll help you find a way.
Embrace the future. Build cleaner. Build greener. Build with Carib Cement.
Solutions. Support. Service. Smart AI features. DigiView Security Limited. Human detection. Line crossing. license plate recognition, 180-degree camera view, 360-degree camera view, multiple angle view, face recognition.
For over 40 years, the GN Group of companies have been developing plans, laying foundations, building hundreds of homes of distinction, creating exclusive and secure communities in which we live, play, and raise families. The GN Group of companies, creating homes that people enjoy.
We're back again. Welcome back. We now have the final question and answers part of our program for today. And it is now time for me to introduce the panelists. First, let me introduce Mr. Edward Shakes, who is a highly accomplished senior engineer at the National Water Commission with over 15 years of experience in the design and operation of water and wastewater systems. His expertise extends to the specialized field of rainwater harvesting, where he has dedicated over 4 years to designing sustainable solutions. Edward holds a Bachelor of Engineering in Chemical Engineering and a Master of Project Management, complemented by certifications in rainwater harvesting, grey water use, and structural design. He is a licensed professional engineer in both sanitary and chemical categories and a certified project management professional. He blends technical proficiency with leadership, driving impactful water management projects. We also have as a distinguished panelist, Dr. Christopher Burgess, who is the Managing Director of CEAC Solutions Company. He's also the Managing Director of CEAC Outsourcing Company Limited, and he has a PhD in Climate Studies, a Master's in Environmental Engineering from Imperial College, a Master's in Coastal Engineering from Old Dominion University, and a Bachelor's in Civil Engineering from the University of the West Indies. He has over 28 years experience and has worked on infrastructure projects across the Caribbean, including storm drainage, wastewater treatment, climate change research for various governments and agencies. He has been involved in the Palisades Peninsula Shoreline Protection Project and the JSIF Port Royal Street Coastal Revetment. Dr. Burgess is a registered professional engineer and a member of the Jamaican Institution of Engineers and has published extensively in internal journalists. And finally, Mr. Donald Moore, professional engineering consultant, is a pioneer in civil engineering and construction, led a distinguished 45-year career in the public sector, including the planning and construction of the Emancipation Park and the managing of Clarendon Newtown Project Design Competition. Joining the National Housing Trust in 1992, he now serves as Senior General Manager for the Construction and Development Division, focusing on increasing housing delivery and optimizing the division's performance. He holds a master's degree in civil engineering from Clemson University and is a certified project management professional. His commitment to sustainable development in Jamaica has earned him roles on various committees and boards, including the Jamaica Developers Association Limited. And I think that, even though mentioned before, congratulations are due to him, as he was featured in the recent national awards, which he was awarded the Order of Distinction, the rank of art. Welcome to you all. Who's going to do the first question?
I'll take the shine off of the ball, Afif, and good afternoon to you. Thank you for piloting this webinar this morning. It's been very interesting. I'd like to thank Bobby for his presentation. I only wish he had this journey maybe 15 or 20 years ago, because we can see clearer now that urgently needed, other sources of water for our homes. My questions for Bobby is there a simple system that you can imagine for, let's call it, common use? For example, the homes that Donald might have built at MHT. I noticed the treatment system. Those are fairly intricate. And also, is there any particular reason why you started your presentation with rainwater harvesting versus gray water harvesting? Because I certainly think gray water harvesting is more widely used in Jamaica than rainwater harvesting in some places, certainly in the hotel sector. But yeah, those are my questions, Bobby.
Well, first of all, the request from the organization was about rainwater harvesting, so I focused on that. But it is recognized that a lot of people just use water from their sinks or the showers, etc., to water the gardens in Jamaica, and that's very common practice. So I agree with you. However, I think for developers of major projects, it is important for us to begin to switch to putting in rainwater harvesting as a part of the design and development of these schemes, because we have a lot of concrete roofs that are going to waste, if you will, in terms of being able to collect the water and store it for use for various things related to the development, whether it be even to just water the gardens that are the green spaces around, but also you can use them by putting it into the flushing system for the toilets, etc. And that doesn't require any great treatment. The most common way that water is treated in Jamaica is using chlorination, by adding a chlorinator to your system. And these directly pump the chlorine into the system and give you the necessary contact time. So that is usually what is happening. I hope I've answered both your questions.
Yes, sure.
There was also a question in the chat which dealt with what is the most common treatment for water, and that deals with the whole thing, because it really is, Jamaica is tied basically to chlorination.
I recall on a visit to Bermuda that they have a building code over there which requires every house, which always has a specific type of roof, to harvest water in an underground tank under the house. That's part of their whole building approval situation. And I've often wondered why we haven't adopted anything like this in Jamaica, even on a lesser scale, over the years.
But I think it's being looked at now. It's being considered, because certainly when you look at areas like Mandeville, and when you look at areas in southern St. Elizabeth, it is a requirement of the parish council or the parish municipal council. However, Kingston is moving in a direction where shortly that is going to be needed as well. So I think now that you have some of the major centers that are suffering from water shortages, it is important that this be looked at by the planning authorities to ensure that we have a new set of requirements in terms of major developments. And I agree with you.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, Mr. Moderator. Robert, good, excellent presentation. Just to note from an NHT perspective, as we make the lot sizes smaller, and within the Kingston area, as we go into apartments, townhouses, it becomes a lot more difficult to manage these systems. I saw one of your examples was a flat tank, which would be, I suppose, an ideal approach, because when most townhouses now are the lots are getting smaller and smaller. The backs are usually almost non-existent, 0 lot lines and so on. So I think we need to look at a way of treating with those in particular. So special approach for townhouse developments, for apartments as well, because the management of anything in an apartment complex is usually not done well. I mean, Jamaica is well known for not managing things anyway. And we talk about issues as you mentioned in your presentation of things like mosquitoes, the need to clean tanks once a year. All of those things become very critical in this system. Otherwise, it may have other negative impacts on us. But I know that in Mandeville, for example, we're doing developments, of course, and what we do, we give people service lots in general, because getting into deciding where tanks go and all of those things and whether people want to properly manage them is something that we try to keep away from.
I can understand that.
I can appreciate that, being from Mandeville. I always remember having a tank outside or a tank under the house with a pump. So yes, we have 2 questions from Mark Farquharson. Excellent presentation. Based on the levels of treatment and maintenance needed, will you generally support RWH for possible uses as an economically viable option? Do you have numbers to support whether yes or no? And the second question, if I can, all right, go ahead. I'll pose a second question after.
All right, well, to be honest with you, the reality is that most people are not going in for putting in sophisticated systems, because the water rates that are being charged in Jamaica, in my opinion, are just too low. So most people just depend on the grid, and the numbers don't add up when you spend, $100,000 putting in a system. Where it does make sense, however, is, for instance, in the case of a high school, where one of their major costs is going to be water for the children. And there they need to put in water harvesting systems, which are some costs one time, and then you are reaping the benefits down the road by mixing it with the grid system. In the case of Monroe College, we have had a system in place for about 100 years. And every now and then we have to rethink the whole system. We had a burial, destroyed practically everything recently. So we are now in the process of looking at how we can restore that system and improve it and put in water treatment as well. But those cases are for public institutions, as well as, in my opinion, now, we have to look at it for major developments, whether it is hotel developments or it is developments of major complexes for residential.
There's also another question from are there any current plans towards developing national RWH standards, including things like allowable uses and water quality requirements?
Anybody can speak to that, maybe?
Right, I do think that is being addressed, actually, because I think what you call it, a white paper or so, some policy positions were circulated for review. So I think so, that all of those matters are being considered.
Any comments, Edward?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. All right, so this is really just to add what Robert was saying regarding the economics. What is really important? So Robert mentioned high schools, institutional use in terms of economics. Now, the location is one way. If a house is located in the Mandeville, in the Manchester areas where they are frequent, rainfall, the Stony Hill area. One has to consider, look, if a house is experiencing a lot of disruption from the grid, let's say a rainwater harvesting system is installed, a key parameter would be, right, would that system install save in terms of water bills? Would there be monies being saved in terms of water from grid usage, and also the convenience of having a secondary supply? So cost savings with respect to grid usage, that would be an excellent consideration for the economic viability and the location as well.
Yeah.
And let me answer another question. There was another question in terms of the safety, in terms of underground storage. That underground storage would have to be very watertight, and basically to prevent any dust or any other contaminants. So that's the key thing about the underground storage. And of course, in terms of safety and contaminants, the homeowner can also purchase test kits to really monitor the quality of the rainwater. So while the treatment is done, it's important to monitor the quality of the water use.
Agreed.
So that's my comments.
Agreed.
Those are my comments.
I'd like to add to the conversation, moderator, that it's going to be critical for government to formulate guidelines and policies and incentives to encourage these systems. Like most climate resilience systems, they tend to be seen as add-ons or optional, especially initially, competing with the immediate cost considerations of purchasers. And so we need to kind of guide the public, guide the end user into using more of these rainwater harvesting systems, because certainly we have about a 20-25% chance of drought each year. No, but that's going to increase to about 60% in another 30 years, 40 years. You know, and we'll have to kind of prepare ourselves. There are going to be some years that are going to be back to back. And so we want to encourage their use. But I want, and through you, Chair, are there any projects, government projects that we know of that have used these systems that are kind of flagships, Bobby, that you can point to say, here's where they were used and they worked well?
Well, there are private developers who are incorporating water harvesting systems into their projects. And some of those are acquired by the National Housing Trust. And you can therefore call them, yes, they're government projects that have them. But as I think Donald can attest, it's not a requirement by the Housing Trust or any other government agency that you have water harvesting. It's just a matter that if a developer has it and it turns out that it fits the profile of the users or the demand, and the Housing Trust decides to buy the entire scheme, then that is something that will end up being a government project that has water harvesting. But right now it's hit or miss. It's not a requirement. And I do believe that we have to seriously consider putting in place the requirements that water harvesting be considered upfront in design and development of major projects. In particular, in certain areas of the corporate area where, you know, your supply goes and comes regularly, and also in areas like Mandeville, etc.
I just want to know that there clearly is a benefit, a cost-saving benefit. I mean, I now collect my rainwater in a drum and use it for landscaping purposes. Of course, what I found, and I'm not sure if any study has been done about this, is that when we have drought conditions, they actually last for a long time and there is no rain. The last time I recall that we went months with zero rain. It means that a rainwater harvesting system won't help you in those circumstances. What will help you would be, one, to ensure that you treat your aquifers properly. That means you get your water when you have heavy rain, that you stuff it in storage. I mean, Edward can talk about making the dam bigger and all of those things, increasing the capacity of dams. But the aquifer, Ligani aquifer, is one way of absolutely taking care of some of the issues, and also to reuse grey water, as was mentioned before. That reuse your water as many times as you can.
Yes. So just want to so as Mr. Moore mentioned about aquifer, and it should be encouraged also that, you know, with respect to groundwater sources, that permeable structures, permeable pavements be adopted, of course. And of course, that will actually, you know, lighten the risk of flooding. And I don't know if you have traveled along Duke Street, and there are some sections where they have used permeable paving stones. So I believe that should also be a serious consideration with respect to drainage, and also really you know, reduce risk of flooding, and also recharging the aquifers. So I mean, I may probably stray away from the topic that's presented, but I just believe that is something that should be raised. The use really the increased use of permeable structures in order to, you know, facilitate better aquifer recharge. So I believe that is really important. What many persons may say, you know, we have in all of this drought, why not make the tanks and the reservoirs much bigger? And I will tell them that, look, I mean, anecdotally, the demand that is out there for, they will say, for Kingston is 50 million imperial gallons per day. Now, is it wise to build a 50 million imperial gallon storage tank, and that will only store water for 1 day, right? So those are some considerations, I mean, that we need to you know, look to in terms of storage, and also having rainwater harvesting as really supplementing our general water supply, especially when you have conditions, you know, where the rainfall is very, very heavy. And for example, sources such as Constant Spring would become very turbid. And that's where particularly rainwater harvesting would be, you know, setting up such a system in the Kingston area would be essential, because when we have our facilities or major sources become very turbid, it can be difficult. The systems have to shut off to really maintain the treatment systems.
Any more questions for Bobby on this, or any more opinions to be? All right, then I think that we've come to the end. I want to thank Bobby, and I want to thank all of the panel for participating and making this such an interesting webinar from beginning to end. And I just want to say thanks not only to you, but I'm sure Dayton will convey thanks to our various sponsors too. And so it's been an enjoyable experience. Thanks very much. I'm sure I have learned a lot, and I'm sure that all those who have participated have also learned a remarkable amount. Thank you all very much, and let me hand back over to Dayton.
Thank you very, very much, Steve. You have certainly been a wonderful moderator. You have kept us on time. I know that Bertina is over the moon, that you have kept everybody in check and kept it moving and entertaining and everything else. You're certainly a great moderator, and I hope that next year you will be available and your services will be happily engaged once more. Thank you ever so much. And of course, we have to thank, this morning we had a wonderful prayer by our longest serving chairman, Reynolds Scott, and followed by a very, very considered presentation by Dr. Wayne Henry from the Planning Institute of Jamaica, really letting us know where we are in terms of climate change and what we need to do. And we certainly a good wake-up call to get us in the right frame of mind. So we then listened to Courtney Winter from Jamaica Mortgage Bank, who really laid down, let us know what the opportunities are as developers in the not low income, but the lower end of the market, where there is, according to him, and I believe him, almost in unlimited potential to grow, to develop housing within the range of 8.5, 10 million, so as much as 25 million. And if we can tackle that and get that a significant amount of housing done in that area, it will create employment, and it will also reduce the pressure on housing in the lower end of the scale. So it'll be good for everybody all around. Then we had Mr. Matthew Royal come and tell us about the things that we need to do to make sure that our developments are covenants are modified prior to start of construction. And the big takeaway I have from that is that don't break ground without your professionals, in particular your attorney and your surveyor and your quantity surveyor and architect, to make sure that before you get going, you have everything lined up. Your neighbors are in harmony with you. In fact, the neighbors may be clamoring to buy one of your units. So that is key. Also, Bobby Stevens told us about rainwater harvesting, which is something I think is essential that we do. Eddie Shakes just told us that underground aquifers need to be recharged. So this is all part of what we need to incorporate into our developments, because we can't keep taking the bucket to the well. We have to put something back in there, make sure that the water doesn't run up to the sea, that it goes back down into the aquifer and recharges it, because that's where we're going to get the water down the road. So I thank you, my presenters and panelists. And of course, we couldn't do any of this without the sponsors that we have had. Jamaica National Group, Adrian Lumber, Gian, DigiView, Carib Cement, New Era Developments, HChem, National Housing Trust, Jamaica Public Service, Matterland Homes, Wicon, Jamaica Money Market Focus, Jamaica Mortgage Bank, Millennium Properties, Pan Jamaica Property Company, BH Paints, and all of folks who have subscribed and to register to be on the webinar. Part proceeds, of course, have been used in all. Earlier on this year, we donated 1.2 million to UTech students. And of course, that came from part proceeds of these webinars. So we thank you. And we wish you the very best for the rest of the day and for the rest of the year. And as I won't see you for next year, may I wish you an early Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, and all the very, very best for the new year. Thank you all once again. And Afif, take care, and everybody, thank you so much again. God bless.